All right. And I'll now call a special meeting of the council to order regarding approval of Agenda Bill 18111, Resolution 1461, adopting findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions approving the Salish Lodge and Spa expansion, planned residential, planned commercial industrial, PRPCI master plan, number PCI 180001. This was introduced on August 27th and is ready for possible action tonight. Before we begin, then I'll turn it over to the city attorney to address the issue with all the council members.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council members, good evening. As we have in the past, I'd just like to do
Or I'm sorry, Bob, to call Jody. Here. All right, why don't you do, I'll ask the city clerk seat.
James.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Here.
Councilmember Lassay.
Here.
Councilmember Sundwall.
Here.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Here.
Mayor Larson.
I am here. All right, thank you. Sorry for that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, as we have in past meetings, I'd like to do a quick check-in with you on the appearance of fairness doctrine issues. By all means, if there's been any change with respect to your interest in the property, relationships, et cetera, please let me know those. Otherwise, I'll assume there has been no change, and then I'll just ask you to disclose whether you've been the party to any ex parte or off-the-record communications with either proponents or opponents of the project since the council last met last Wednesday on October 24th. Councilmember Jeans.
No.
Councilmember Ross.
No.
Councilmember Holloway.
No.
Councilmember Mayhew.
No.
Councilmember Lassay.
No.
Councilmember Sundwall.
No.
Councilmember Shepherd.
No.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mayor, that's all I have. I'll turn it back to Mr. Rogers if you'd like a staff presentation. Otherwise, we did circulate a revised, clean version of Resolution 1461 along with finding an Exhibit A, which is findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval that incorporate all of the changes that the council has discussed to date, changes to the Planning Commission, findings, conclusions, and conditions, and then incorporates those of the commission that were unchanged. We circulated to council that exhibit as well as one in underscore and strikeout that showed changes from the council directed changes, and then Mr. Rogers also provided just an itemized list of all of those changes and where they appear by section and page, or finding, conclusion number, and page number. So I don't know if Jason wants to add anything. Otherwise, we would just await council.
All right. So, Jason, I understand since there's a red line and a clean version ready for approval tonight,
right.
We can.
I have nothing to add beyond what the city attorney mentioned, although I'm certainly happy to take any questions the council has, but I would defer to the mayor at this point.
Thank you, Jason. So I want to get myself in the habit of making sure to respectfully tend to all council members doing round robin. So just kicking off tonight, I'm going to go ahead and start with any remaining questions and concerns or comments. Start with you, Bob, at the end of the table. We'll just move down this way.
I'm good.
Right. Councilmember Ross.
Everyone should have a copy of this. I think on finding 57, it shows that the view analysis was based on 55-foot heights, where it actually was based on, if you looked at the drawings, up to 100 feet. And so I thought the 100 feet should be in there, included in the facts of finding, and then also the next page, it would be part of the conclusion.
Oh, that's this.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Ross, if you could hold further comments. I kind of, as a matter of protocol, I need to back up just 1 second, ask for someone to make a motion to put this on the floor for formal discussion and debate.
So who did this?
Never mind that. When you just the motion that's in the original agenda packet, if someone has that.
Oh. So moved.
Or just move. If you could read the agenda bill 18111 and then move to, or move to approve. Someone can move to approve. Is that sufficient, Jody, for her to say so moved?
Who has that?
You don't have the agenda bill?
Are you just looking for someone to read it?
Yes.
Okay. Resolution 1461 adopting findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions approving. I move that we adopt. Okay. Resolution 1461 adopting findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions approving the Salish Lodge and Spa expansion, planned residential, planned commercial industrial, PR/PCI master plan number PCI 18-000001.
Perfect.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 18111 as stated by Councilmember Sunwell. Councilmember Ross, please continue with discussion.
Okay. So this is a motion to change finding fact number 57 and conclusion 21, which just adds clarification that the view analysis is basically up to nearly 100 feet in height, that it's not limited to 55 feet. And the wording's up there as well as everyone has a copy of it.
All right, Councilmember Sunwell.
So I'm curious as to the reason.
Or I'm sorry, I got to get back on the ball here tonight. You were making a formal motion referring to what the written language is before people. So you've moved to ask that you make an amendment to the original motion to include amendments to findings 57 and conclusion 21
Right.
as presented to the council here tonight
need
in
a
hard
second.
copy. And I need a second on that.
Second.
All right, so I have a motion and a second on Councilmember Ross's motion to amend. Councilmember Sunwell.
Okay. You're not used to doing this on fifth Monday, as I understand, Mayor. So I'm curious as to why we would add it. I guess it's right. It confuses. I don't know, it feels like it gives room for the building to be 100, and I know that that's not even something that's contemplated. I know it's outside of code. I'm just curious as to why we would add it, that's all.
Yeah, Councilmember Ross, if you could express what's your primary intent here? What was your concern? What's your intent to correct here?
So because in findings 57, it states the view analysis was based on 55-foot heights. And if we've had discussion before that it possibly could be approved up to 60-foot heights. And nowhere in the facts of finding facts does it state that the analysis was actually up to nearly 100 feet in height.
In other words, that it would be protected up to 100 feet.
Or 60 foot or
Or not
whatever
visible, yeah.
Well, yeah, it would be protected up to there. But.
Okay.
Councilmember Holloway?
So I guess I totally agree, and I'm a little confused why you need to do this. That was the discussion we had last time. There's no basis in the findings for 60-foot constraint.
That's not what's at issue.
There's no basis in the findings for a 60-foot constraint. So what she's put on the table is the building is 55 foot, but they did the view analysis to 100 foot, so you can go anywhere between 55 and 100 and still meet that requirement, which allows us then to do a constraint of 60. So.
But I'm stating in the findings of facts, you don't see 100 feet in
Yeah.
height mentioned anywhere.
So I'm beyond supporting you to say it should have been done for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on this item in the council or suggestion? Not just on the height, I'm sorry, but any question? Oh, Councilmember Sunwell.
So I guess what I'm wondering is the word proposed 55-foot high, was that in the original? Because I'm wondering if we should take that, because I don't know if it's going to be 55, 60, right? So why can't we just put no part of the proposed hotel will be visible from the observation deck, blah, 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 blah. I don't know why we need to assign a height there.
That was just reflecting the height in the original proposal, but you're correct, it could come out.
What I'm trying to avoid is a situation where we had several weeks ago, where we had these conflicting codes, and I realize it's not apples to apples here, but we had these conflicting codes downtown of what was supposed to supersede what.
based on 50-foot heights, it achieves the intent of this finding of fact.
With the language. The purpose of the finding is to reflect what the view analysis shows. The finding doesn't reflect an intent about what a condition should be.
This is just to kind of do some house cleaning here? Go ahead.
So in speaking with Councilmember Ross about this, her concern is that the findings of fact do not specifically identify that the Planning Commission adopted their resolution 2018-01, nor do the findings speak to the City Council's review process for this. That is spoken to in the City Council's proposed resolution 1461. You'll find the relevant whereas statements, the recitals on page 2 of the resolution. So this would
hit you for that reason?
Yeah.
No.
Is that a motion?
Call the question.
All right, I need a second to call the
Second.
question. All right, the question's been called. All those in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
I'm sorry, how many noes did I have?
3.
3? So I need 5.
Who was a no?
I need 5 yeas. So the question is, the question has not been called. We're going to continue
3
discussion.
people hate you.
All right, we're good. Any further discussion and questions, council? Councilmember Summerall.
Actually, no, I withdraw.
Councilmember Lasay.
It's a question for the city attorney. I work in a business where when we duplicate things, we tend to make mistakes. Is it absolutely necessary to add this to the findings to achieve the end result?
No, it's not necessary, and as Mr. Rogers stated, these sentences are stated in recitals in the draft ordinance, Resolution 1461. It's certainly appropriate to have them in the findings, because if you read the preceding findings, it's kind of documenting the procedural history of the matter, and this rounds that out. But it's not strictly necessary since it's already reflected in the resolution. It's council's pleasure.
Councilmember Ross, I assume you were trying to capture the extent of the deliberations involved in the project. Is that was the intent of your concern in the findings?
Yes, I mean, it actually started out with a different question, but this is how it ended up. So to me, I can go either way on this.
Okay. Councilmember Lasay.
Again, another question for the city attorney, or maybe it's for Jason. Are there other whereases in the resolution that are duplicated in the findings?
Let's see, the first whereas on the top of page 2 would be duplicated somewhere, as with the second one. They're duplicated in a little bit more detail, I would say, than the recital. The way I see here,
I think the answer was yes.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't vouch that they're an exact duplicate, but they speak to exactly the same points in in many cases.
Okay, any other discussion on this item, council? All right, we'll go to vote on the amendment of adding these two findings as proposed by Councilmember Ross. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
No.
How many nays did I have? If you could raise your hand. please.
Nay.
Okay, so 4 to 3, the ayes have it, so it will be added. All right, Councilmember Ross, did you have anything else to?
That is it, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Holloway. We're kind of doing the round robin, starting with the Councilmember Mayhew. Any items to address?
I have two of these conditions that I would like to, I guess, make motions regarding.
Okay.
The first
And
is.
do you have a hard copy of any language you want the staff to copy and distribute? While you're making the motion, and can you?
Let's try this. If anyone's not following my wording, we can quickly have
page?
copies made. On page 34 of 35, there's condition number 25.
Hold on. Okay.
This is in regard to
Which number?
number 25.
Thanks.
It's in regards to a concern raised by the Snoqualmie tribe and attempts to, or some addressing of a concern, or at least partial addressing of a concern they've raised. In the wording, my motion is to modify the wording, starting the fourth line, where it reads, approval a professional archaeological monitoring plan that includes, replace the word with the word the, detailed unanticipated discoveries protocol, and then strike such as the example plan. The effect of that modification would be to require the use of that plan as opposed to using it as an example.
Okay, I assume at the beginning of that line where it says approval professional, you wanted that to, a little typo there, whether it says approve a professional or approval of a.
Yes, I hadn't noticed that till I spoke it. You may have noticed. Yeah, I think if we could fix that at the same time, it'd be great.
See if he has that written.
It's not a typo.
Well, it's not a typo.
What was the issue?
What's this final cleanup?
For city review and approval.
So this,
Oh, I think there's supposed to be a comma after that, so sort of a pause. Submit for city review and approval, pause, a professional article.
No,
Right.
right.
Need a wordsmith there, Joan.
actually,
Under 25, read that fourth line.
I think it's okay as it is, actually, Mayor.
That's fine.
Now that I've reread it.
All right.
So the effect of this, so what,
Yep. It's okay.
sorry, do you need to wait for a second before I begin discussing it?
No, my bad, go ahead. And I assume you'll just make a motion and read the language to,
Oh, I thought I did.
He did. I want to see if I can get it in.
all right, my bad.
May I speak to it?
Yeah, motion and a second is stated by Councilmember Mayhew.
So-
Discussion.
I'm looking to see if the applicant has a reaction, because I'd be interested if they did, but I have the idea that they don't have a concern about this. But there's a archaeological monitoring plan. So this is a plan that deals with what if during construction some artifact is discovered, what would happen. And there's a very detailed protocol that's laid out, and it has been looked at by a number of external parties, and it seemed like a very strong protocol. The way this is currently worded is it doesn't require that particular protocol to be used, just that it be used as an example.
That's actually in condition 27, the last line. So just the example was just so that there was some guidance around what the UDP would look like. I don't know if the applicant minds the striking in condition 25, but I think the question about whether the conditions require the UDP to be followed was raised in previous council meetings, and when we didn't propose additional language, because when we went back and double-checked, we saw that language in 27 had been included that says if something's found, you then follow the UDP protocol.
So then is it, I don't read the sentence the way you just described, but to the question, is it the idea then that all parties are in agreement that that specific protocol is in fact the one that will be followed?
The example? No, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. The way I read these conditions, that the applicant develops for city review and approval an unanticipated discoveries protocol. What they submit should be along the lines of the example that their own consultant said this is what should be done. The city then has its consultants review and city approves the UDP. That UDP is then in place, and then under condition 27, if any ground disturbing activities uncover protected material, then work needs to stop, the area is secured, and then the protocol, the remaining protocol in the approved UDP should then be followed. We could certainly beef up the language if council would like in condition 27, but that was the intention of the way those two conditions should work together.
Councilmember Holloway and Councilmember Sunwell.
So I believe the Councilmember Mayhew's stipulation is that the UDP provided as example will be the UDP in effect. And I believe that's the action of his motion, is not to have a new UDP, but to use the one in example. So tell me why not? Or tell.
Terry, do you have any concerns either way?
Not really, but let me just address the council if I may. Thank you, Terry Danish, on behalf of the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe. So clearly, the last sentence of paragraph of condition 25 reads that the monitoring plan with the UDP must be kept on site at all times during construction. So it's contemplated that that UDP that's been developed based on the example that's provided in Exhibit 3 or Appendix 3 is then kept on site and used for purposes of any actions that follow with respect to construction of the project, including those identified in paragraph 27 as City Attorney Sturbank indicated. So I don't think that there's any question, and I do agree with City Attorney Sturbank that the idea here is to provide an example for purposes of preparation of what the UDP should look like. But we will be preparing a UDP, and it will be used and kept on site at all times for purposes of this development, and will be in place in the event that any of those circumstances described in condition number 27 arise. So,
Councilmember Sunwell.
I think it's germane because we've jumped to number 27 in support of 25. But to what Mr. Sturbank said, I can't remember the legal, to me, should is not strong enough. I believe shall is a word that legally Mr. Sturbank requires. Shall is the same as must, but should is softer, so I'd like that to either say shall or must, because I don't want it to be any, kind of should have maybe. So when it comes time to make a motion on that, I will do that, but I think we need to get through 25 first.
Yeah, that would certainly be an appropriate amendment for council to make.
Councilor Mayhew.
Yeah, just to clarify, the concern I have is as the applicant identified, well, my tabs are different than you guys. If you go to mine is tab 5, which is Appendix C, Cultural Resource Analysis. And then on my tab 35, there's a letter to the Community Development Director from State Historic Preservation Officer, which refers to that specific UDP that is contained here. So we have this UDP, which may have been intended as an example, but it's now been, the State Historic Preservation Officer has said that that specific one, that they're in agreement with it. And so what unless there's some reason that we really want to reopen this, I thought, let's just require, not that this be an example, but require this protocol. It's the protocol. There's still a plan, I believe, that gets, and maybe I'm unclear about this, that gets developed around, but just that this protocol that we already have in the record from the State Historic Preservation Officer, that they're in agreement with it. I'd like to make sure we just stick with that one, unless there's some other thing here that I'm not aware of that should make us back off from that.
Councilmember Sunwell.
Maybe this is part of the confusion. My assumption is that the UDP is a defined protocol. You can have various plans and mechanisms to achieve that protocol, and I think what's fixed, how I read this is, what's fixed is it has to be the UDP protocol, which I assume is a standard protocol, but there could be different plans of how to achieve that. And so it's the plan that was set up as an example, not the protocol.
defer to the applicant on that.
And if there's a difference between a protocol and a plan, then maybe it is fine as it is. If there's not, then I'm in agreement with Councilmember Mayhew.
Terry, Rachel, do you guys have any concerns with this one way or the other?
Rachel Nathanson on behalf of the tribe. I don't think it's a problem. We're, the UDP is a standard protocol. You're absolutely right on that. And the plan that needs to be created is going to have just probably more specificity than we currently have in the example that's been handed to you. So we're fine with any language. We know that we're going to do this to the nth degree in terms of protecting anything that's on that site, if there is anything. So far, we don't think that's the case, but we're going to do what's right for the protection of cultural resources on that site.
Given that the cultural resources pertain to your client, I assume. Councilmember Mayhew. Oh, I thought you had another question or comment. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on this item, Council?
Can we just review real quickly the changes? I only got the first into the.
Councilmember Mayhew, if you could just reread your suggested
Starting
revision.
on the fourth,
On 25, fourth line down.
yes, sorry, making sure that this matched. On the fourth line, I'll just begin reading. Unanticipated Discoveries Protocol, UDP. Sorry, let me try again. On the fourth line, approval, a professional archaeological monitoring plan that includes, strike the word insert the word the. Detailed Unanticipated Discoveries Protocol, UDP, strike the words such as the example plan.
Okay.
Include in Appendix 3. Okay. Councilmember Shepherd.
Paragraph 26 also has the word should. Training to workers should be provided. Can we make that shall?
That's not part of this motion. It's not germane, but if you want to, after we conclude this, if, again, when it comes to you, or I've noted those for both.
I'm going to come back to 27.
Yeah, Councilmember Sunwell and you. Any other questions on the motion? Motion to amend? Okay, so I'll now ask for a vote on Councilmember Mayhew's motion to amend. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
All right, two nays and 5 ayes. So the ayes have it. So it'll,
Nays for,
oh, who were the nays? I'm sorry.
Sunny and Holloway.
Lissay and Holloway. All right, so the section 25 will be amended as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Councilmember Mayhew, did you have one or two other items? Oh,
I did. They're related to item 30 on page 35 of 35.
or let me do this since it's kind of related and we're on this section right now. Councilmember Sunwell, if you could make a quick motion on just replacing should with shall.
So
on
I'd like
26.
to make a motion in, what are these called? Findings of, no, these are.
Conditions of approval.
Oh,
yeah.
on items 27, I'm sorry.
Item 27 on page 34 of 35. The last sentence, I would like to read, the protocol outlined in the UDP shall then be followed, to replace the word should. So shall, which I believe is a legally binding must, correct?
Yes.
So shall would replace should. That's my only amendment for 27.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, voting on Councilmember Sunwell's motion then. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. Since we're still on that same page, Councilmember Shepherd, if you'd like to make a motion on number 26, a similar one, replacing should with shall.
Yes.
Go ahead, make the motion.
Okay, and I'd like to move that we change paragraph 27 to change,
26, paragraph 26.
oh, I'm sorry, 26. Okay. To change the training to workers shall be provided by a professional archaeologist.
So moved. Or second, sorry.
Thank you for correcting me. We have a motion and a second, by Councilmember Shepherd. Any discussion, Councilmember Holloway?
I'd like to propose an amendment to expand that to be 26 and 27, and in general should be replaced with shall.
We've already taken care of 27. If you could just,
Partially took care of 27. You changed the last sentence.
correct.
There are two other shoulds in there.
Oh, yeah.
Shouldn't stop, you shall stop.
Okay, so are you doing an amendment to Councilmember Shepherd's amendment?
Yes, I'm trying to get this done in one
Second.
movement.
All right. Now we're into a baby dinosaur here, folks. Any discussion on Councilmember Holloway's motion?
Is the motion to change all shoulds to shalls in 26 and 27?
I believe that's what he
He's
said.
just trying to get credit for it. That's cool.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Hey, I got 3, you got 1. Okay, I mean, get
All right.
credit.
Any further discussion?
Jesus.
Okay, voting on Councilmember Holloway's amendment. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. And I think that takes care of the, your motion as well, Councilmember Shepherd. So
It should.
it shall.
Mayor, do we need to vote on the main motion?
I'm sorry?
Do we need
still
to
have to
vote on the
No,
main
no,
motion?
I know where we are.
Okay, sorry.
Councilmember Mayhew, did you have any other items?
Oh, yes, item 25.
No, point of order. Mr.
Point of order. So we voted on the amendment to the amendment, but we didn't vote on the new amendment to actually enable it.
I'm sorry, which motion am I?
Councilmember
So-
Shepherd's as amended. Now,
I made a little dinosaur. It became the dinosaur. We now need to vote on that dinosaur.
Well, I thought I dismissed it by asking Councilmember Shepherd, was now her motion satisfied, which it was, because that's all she was doing, was changing should to
But
shall.
we never voted that all the shoulds.
Oh, we have to vote, so we have to vote on 26.
it's a combined 26 and 27 now as a result of the amendment.
All right, I'm still a little
Aye.
confused, but yeah.
Yeah, aye.
As stated by the, yeah, so back to the Councilmember Shepherd's motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion's carried. Now we're back to the original motion on the whole enchilada. Councilmember Mayhew, did you have any other items?
Yes, on regarding item number 30, on page 35 of 35. So I have a question to help me understand what I want. There's 2 areas of concern here. One is there was some language that was in number 30 at the last time we met and is now gone away, but it's not shown as a strike-through here. So I'm just wondering if that was inadvertently, or whether I make a motion to just restore that language, or I just don't know why it disappeared.
What's the language?
The language is
We
that,
we could show the red line on the screen if you like.
Yeah.
It's in-
might be easier than me reading it to you.
Jason, you want to address the question, or do you understand the question?
I'm trying to see what got removed, because I don't have last week's version in front of me.
Is it this one here, Jason?
It'd be the one from the 24th, and I don't have that one in front of me.
Oh, is it there? And I just didn't, where?
So we did this.
Oh, disappeared.
Generate two.
I can run and go get it, but that will take a minute. Right there?
It's there, it's disappeared. Yeah, orange.
Jason.
That's just the same.
Is it there?
Requirement that, got it. Oh, right. That one has been removed. Good catch.
You're right, that did not make it in there.
Yeah.
Because the council changed its, so where it reads, methods to address parking demand for large events that might generate spillover
I'm sorry, where are
parking."
you? What line?
Oh, I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4,
On
5, 6.
item 30.
Line 7 on number 30. So you'll see, right after city special event permit, which is capitalized, you'll see,
Laser.
Gotcha, methods to address, right?
sorry, let me get the laser pointer.
Fire Chief, do you have a laser
Well, I'm
pointer?
just
I
going to
can borrow?
point.
I've got one.
Fire Chief, I'm kidding, because last time I
Right
borrowed
here.
it, you didn't get it back for
I'll
weeks.
point so you can see.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
The part that's missing is the requirement that hotel workers shall not park in the expanded lower parking lot and/or the residential neighborhood.
Yeah, Jason's going to address that, and
That section's the part
So,
that's missing.
a couple things.
we're just trying to orientate people as to where that's supposed to be or where it's missing.
So where it begins, methods to address parking demand for large events in order to discourage and/or minimize spillover parking got changed, so that is in there. And then,
Would you like me to show you?
It's after the
and
section that's.
the
cities-
requirement that the plan address parking, or excuse me, a requirement that hotel workers shall not park in the expanded lower parking lot and/or the residential neighborhood built in the PR plan portion of the site was deleted somehow.
Or not included.
Or it was not included in there.
All right. Can you, Jim, may you make a motion to that effect to re-add or add that language in that section?
I can read it again, and then you can say so moved if you prefer. Or you have, okay. Go ahead.
So my motion,
Move to.
let me just orient this thing here.
Just item 30 on page 35 of 35.
1, 2, 3, on the location, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I move that on the 5th line, following the semicolon, following the capitalized word permit, that the following words.
On item 30 of 30.
On item 30, that the following words be inserted. A requirement that hotel workers shall not park in the expanded lower parking lot and/or the residential neighborhood built in the PR plan portion of the site, semicolon.
And Jason, you have that language, correct?
Yes.
Second.
All right. Motion and a second is stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Is there any further discussion, council?
Is that all that it'll capture it with that, or?
I have an additional item. So I had 2 items related to number 30. That is one, and then I have one related to another part. This one I thought was non-controversial because I think it was omitted accidentally, not intentionally.
Correct. There was something that we agreed on last time. We're just getting it back in here. For some reason, it was omitted, yeah. Councilmember Summer.
I feel like we need to vote on this, which would allow us to accept or reject the other one separately if we wanted to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's his intent. Yeah. All right, if there's no further discussion, we'll vote on Councilmember Mayhew's amendment. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. So back to the main motion. Councilmember Mayhew had another item here on section
Yes.
30.
Sorry, just give me a moment to reorient myself. Okay. My motion, just to orient people, relates to the words immediately following where we were just focused. And my motion is to strike the following words and replace them with the words "a requirement." The words that I'm proposing we strike, that I'm moving that we strike are methods to address parking demand for large events in order. So that it would read, after that amendment, it would read, following the semicolon from the prior item, it would read, a requirement to discourage and/or minimize spillover parking, etc.
Okay.
All right. I need, Councilmember.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. I think everybody captured it. Jason and Bob, you guys captured it. All right, any discussion, council?
Actually,
Councilmember Jeans?
I'd have you read it again, so I'm
Right, thank you. I was just.
So, could you, Jason, would you mind
I can do it.
pointing there?
So,
I can read it if you just orient them to where we're, so right before the word method that Jason's pointing to, we would strike the word methods to address parking demand for large events in order, strike all of those words, and replace them with a requirement.
To discourage.
Well, then continue on to discourage, yeah.
Could you read that whole with your?
So then it would read, if that were accepted, that item would read, a requirement to discourage and/or minimize spillover parking to the expanded lower parking lot, etc. So it's simplifying it, moving away from whether it's a large event or not. It's just simply requiring that they discourage this kind of spillover parking. In essence, in all events, not just large events. It just requires them to attempt to discourage and minimize spillover parking.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So this is something that they need to do prior to their certificate of occupancy, but what you're describing sounds like something that's like ongoing process. I think all they can give you before they get their certificate of occupancy is a method to do it.
Mayor?
Councilmember Mayhew.
If I could just point out, so the entirety of item 30 relates to a plan, a parking management plan that must be submitted to and approved by the community development director. And then there's a whole listing of things that must be covered by that plan. And so the effect of this would require that plan would include a requirement to discourage and or minimize spillover parking. And so that would just have to be part of their plan that they are doing that. That the part of their plan addresses that.
All right, any other discussion from councils? Rachel or Terry, any concerns on your part to respond to this? Okay. Councilmember Lassay?
I'm finding that wording awkward. I think what's being said is saying the exact same thing. It may be more direct, it may be more or stronger language, but because this is related to preparing a parking management plan before, receiving the certificate of occupancy, I'm not sure how they can do a plan that would require them to discourage or minimize spillover parking. There's no way to author that or control that. It's a method to address parking demand for large events in order to discourage. It's, there's no one way is going to be the right way. It's a matter of addressing as many as you can and then adapting and responding in the future. So I'm not sure how that makes this more comprehensible. Maybe the author of that amendment can help me understand.
Councilmember Sunwell.
I guess I sort of see what Councilmember Lassay is saying. All of these, my understanding is that part of this plan and this list of things, each of these items is a requirement of the plan. So I'm not sure that a requirement is necessary. I don't necessarily think it's wrong. I just think that every item listed there is a part of the required criteria of that parking management plan. But there might be a different opinion on that, to my right.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, I was trying to simplify. I had two things in mind. I was trying to simplify, and just if you look two lines above the wording, a requirement that appears, I was just trying to copy that. But to simplify this, to get at the thing I'm really worried about, I'd like to modify my motion, and instead of what I moved, change it to be that strike my previous motion in its entirety and instead solely delete the words for large events. So there's a more comprehensive requirement than just for large events, which is my main concern.
So moved.
No, I moved.
He moved it.
Second,
Right.
that movement.
Motion, a second, is stated by Councilmember Mayhew, who chose to withdraw his motion, or prior motion, and strike the motion. So it would simply read after the semicolon, methods to address parking demand to discourage and or minimize.
In order to discourage.
In order to discourage
Yeah.
animals.
Yes, sorry. Okay. Any further discussion on this? Councilmember Shepherd.
So the intent of this paragraph, is it for them to do ongoing enforcement of parking? Or, I really don't know what, I know they're supposed to come up with an idea, but I don't know what exactly we're thinking.
Let's go to Jason. I'll come back to you, Councilmember Mayhew.
To your question, Councilmember Shepherd, the intent of this condition is to require a parking management plan, and the plan requires, among other things, in its current state, monitoring of ongoing parking demand and addressing future parking needs. And so it's not a, while any individual plan is, if you will, a snapshot in time, the intent is not for it to be static forever. you know, as conditions change, then the plan might have to change to accommodate that a little bit. One of the things the plan might require could be some kind of enforcement, or maybe not. That's to be determined when the plan actually gets drafted by the applicant.
Okay.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly what Mr. Rogers just said, which, and I had raised this notion of enforcement, I think, at our last meeting, and I became convinced, based on the discussion and explanation, that that was hard to really require such a thing. Depending on what their plan contains, it may have to be enforced by someone, for example, the city, not them. It was too big an ask, given that we don't have such a plan. So it seemed like this was a reasonable, or the best solution that was reasonable in the situation.
All right, any further discussion, council? All right, with that, we'll do a vote on Councilmember Mayhew's new motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. And we're now back to the original motion. Councilmember Mayhew, did you have any remaining items?
No other items.
Councilmember Lissay.
Yeah, I have 2 items. Let's try to get ourselves oriented as well. We'll use that word again. Under condition of approval, condition number 3. So we're on page 30 of 35. The language we discussed in there has been modified adequately. We did have a lot of discussion around item number 3C, which it talks about shall not exceed 60 feet. That discussion was in regards to potentially needing a finding to explain why 60 feet is a condition. Was there a finding that was found? Is there a finding we can reference here that justifies setting this height at 60 feet?
So you'll note that none of the conditions specifically reference any finding or conclusion. They follow along. However, let me find it here. Finding 57 was, oh, excuse me, that's the wrong one. Where is it? Finding 78, states the PR/PCI master plan submittal narrative states at page 16 that, quote, the tallest structure on the site, meaning the hotel, is proposed at 55 feet. Therefore, no buildings will be visible from within Falls Park. So there's a specific finding that references the height there. And then, in conclusion, then if you look at conclusion 21, there are some significant additions to this.
What page?
I'm sorry. Conclusion 21 starts on page 21. And there were a number of additions to this conclusion that reference the height and some analysis of the height. And so one of the additions is the portion.
So finding 57, which was amended pursuant to Councilmember Ross's motion earlier this evening.
Thank you. So we added the line that which is on the 4th. Well, it's not the 4th actually, but it says therefore a deviation to the PCI zone maximum height limit of 40 feet is required and was already granted by the City Council's approval of the 75-foot height limit in Section 2.4 of the development agreement. Further, at the end, there's a substantial discussion about the conceptual level of the master plan for the hotel at this stage. And it says, and it concludes, given this, it is appropriate to allow a height deviation for up to 60 feet to allow for a small amount of additional flexibility.
That's under 21, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's all under conclusion 21.
Which I think answers the question or gives the detail.
So that thank you for connecting the dots on that one. If there's other comments on that, I've got actually where I have an amendment or a motion to one of these. If I keep going then.
Yes, please.
Under.
Did you say you had 2 or 3 items, Councilor Inslee?
I just had 2 items, so this is the second
so this is your second item?
So under, I think this findings of fact number 78, which we just discussed, it says is proposed at 55 feet. I move to insert the word approximately prior to 55 feet.
And I'm sorry, what?
Item number 78.
78, okay. On page?
On page, sorry, 17 of 35.
Okay. Do I have a second, counsel? Give them a chance to
You wanna
catch
re-
up.
I'll restate the
Let's let
motion
them
then.
catch up to where the section is, and then
Yeah,
if
so
you could
pa-
restate your motion, please.
Page 17, finding of fact number 78, where it reads currently, and I'll jump ahead to the second line, structure on the site, and then the hotel in parentheses, is proposed at 55 feet, therefore no buildings will be visible from within Falls Park. I move to insert the word approximately so that it reads, is proposed at approximately 55 feet.
Second.
Motion and a second is stated by Councilman Lissay.
So the reasoning behind that is that in all the other locations.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, there might be a procedural issue, Councilman, or Sturbank wanted to.
Just wanted to point out that that finding is quoting the narrative that came with the submittal. So the 8.5 by 11 pages that came with the submittal, it's quoting directly. So if you're proposing to amend it, you probably need to do something about the quotation marks, because otherwise, if you add language to it, it will not be then accurately reflecting the quote.
Yeah, so Councilman Lissay, if you understand, it reads, the PRPCI master plan submittal narrative states in page 16 that quote, and then unquote. So
I overlooked that. And the reasoning, let me get to the reasoning behind this, is that everywhere else we state approximately 55 feet while we're referring to height in the proposal.
I think everybody understands, no, it makes perfect sense, and
Yeah, how do
but
we deal
maybe
with
just
that?
need to resolve whether it quotes narrative or is,
Strike the whole thing.
or you could put the proposed in parentheses perhaps, or what would,
Or brackets.
could we do that, Bob? And that would make,
Where you could,
Within brackets.
this is longer, you could add
Or
a
ju-
sentence that says, you know, or a semicolon at the end of the quote that says, however, this is conceptual.
Councilmember Sunwell and Councilmember Jean.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how this is from council deliberation, so I'm trying to remember this getting in and the intent of it. The 55 feet is mentioned so many times in here, I don't even know why 78 is necessary. But I agree, we can't change a quote. So, I mean, this is specifically referencing a section in the document that we can't change. So I'm either fine leaving it as is or striking the whole thing.
Well, yeah. I won't.
You're trying to justify 60.
Councilmember Lissay, Councilmember Jean and Councilmember Lissay. Bob, did you have a question?
No.
Councilmember Lissay.
I'm not trying.
I'm sorry.
There was a bird in my ear said something about justifying 60 feet, but that's not really the case. I'm just trying to be accurate in what it is. And since this is added language after council deliberations based upon previous discussions, I think we have an opportunity to maybe remove the quotations and simply either remove the quotations or put approximately in brackets as the hotel has been added in brackets, which indicates that it's added language to what was quoted.
Yeah, or might I suggest to change it, would just say the PRPCI master plan submittal notes that the tallest structure on the site of the hotel is proposed, well, I guess it's still a reference, yeah, sorry, never mind. Rachel, go.
Yeah.
Rachel, go
I
ahead.
want to deal with this.
If I can just jump in, Rachel Nathanson here. We don't put approximately throughout that entire plan because of the fact we state it's a conceptual plan. So you might talk about our conceptual PRPCI master plan notes, et cetera, et cetera.
that's a good
It
point.
is a conceptual submittal.
I'd like to modify my motion then.
Go ahead. Or just withdraw the original motion.
I withdraw the
and
original
restate.
motion and propose the following motion, that we add the word conceptual between the and PR/PCI.
Second.
All right, motion and a second is stated by Councilmember Lissay, excuse me. Any further discussion, council? All right, seeing no further discussion, we'll vote on Councilmember Lissay's motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Councilmember Lissay, anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Councilmember Sunwell?
No.
Councilmember Shepherd?
So I don't know where in this process we come to the point where if we decide we don't want to approve this proposal, how do I relay the information of why I'm not doing that? I don't know that this is the correct window of opportunity to do that.
I'll defer to the city attorney's advice on that question.
Well, Mayor, you have a motion pending on the floor, motion second, and it's now been amended to adopt the resolution. If there isn't further discussion per the council's usual protocol, you would call for a vote. So I don't know if it's really up to the mayor and council how they want to proceed with the discussion at this point, or whether you want. And of course, further discussion is always subject to a motion to call a question.
So if we're back to the original motion, Councilmember Shepherd, you're certainly free to make whatever arguments to try to convince the majority of the council to vote against this motion.
So now's the time, or?
Yeah, I mean, all right.
Okay.
All right. Or before you begin, Councilmember Sunwell had a quick question. Was it a protocol?
No, it was answered.
All right. Go ahead, Councilmember Shepherd.
Okay, so in looking at all of the history of our developer agreement that we're working with now, the amended and restated developer agreement, the original developer agreement back in 2004 had a different batch of property that they were referencing. And as of the Second Amendment, that scope...
Point of order?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure this is germane to the topic because it is the amended and restated development agreement that is under discussion and under, I guess, is the binding developer agreement. The previous ones have been amended and restated, so therefore anything in the original one or the second edition is no longer valid.
Point of order.
I'll sustain the point of order, but I'll allow if you can make a quick nexus between the motion on the floor and statement.
So there's a lot of assumptions made in the amended and restated development agreement, and I think that we have not followed all of the public hearing procedures that are required by RCW 3670B 200 regarding this process that has gone on since 2004. So in our amended and restated development agreement, it references back to all of the prior amendments and the original agreement, but it misrepresents some of the things that happened in all those agreements. And so that's why I would vote against this, because I don't feel that this amended and restated development agreement is a valid agreement or contract.
Anything else? Okay. Councilmember Holloway, then Councilmember Lissay.
So, Chair, I request that if council members who may not have been present believe we did not follow the process, we should specify which parts of the process we skipped and looked at. My opinion is, having been on the council during most of this, we did, to an exasperated level, follow the process and engage public. So if we're going to say we didn't do public per RCW, I want to know specific which ones we didn't do, and let's review that.
I can't recall a development project in the city that's been subject to more exhaustive process over the years than this has been. So.
But if you're going to claim I broke the law, I want to know what I did. And if you can't back it up, don't make the claim.
Councilmember Sunwalt, and then Councilmember Shepherd.
I have nothing.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Lissay.
I had a similar comment, and I would also then state if there is evidence that states to it precisely which public participation was not followed, and which when hearings were not established and when hearings were not held, I would like that specific information on what was not followed and what was not handled through that process.
I'll ask the city attorney to respond to some of that, and we'll go to Councilmember Shepherd.
So by its terms, the amended and restated development agreement incorporates the remaining relevant parts of the prior agreements and supersedes and replaces them. So they're of no longer of any force and effect. And as the Superior Court ruled when we were in litigation with the Snoqualmie tribe, the Land Use Petition Act imposes a 21-day time frame on legal challenges, and if legal challenges to those prior agreements were not brought within 21 days, they're waived, gone, and those agreements are presumed valid, and that's the state of the case law. The court rejected complaints about prior amendments and ruled that the amended and rejected claims against the validity of the amended and restated agreement and ruled that it's valid. So that is the only currently legally binding, and it is in effect. So whatever arguments someone might make about the process for the previous amendments is not legally relevant to the application in front of you.
Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Mayhew, and Councilmember Sunwell.
So specifically in amended and restated development agreement, it refers to Exhibit A.
I'm sorry, which amendment, which number?
Exhibit A in the amended and restated development agreement.
There's probably a number of Exhibit As and a number of amendments over the years. Which amendment was the fourth, the fifth amendment with the?
There's only one Exhibit A in the amended and restated development agreement.
Okay.
And that specifies what parcels were supposed to be considered for this development agreement, and it misrepresents the fact that it's redundant or the same as the original development agreement, which it's not. So there's misrepresentation as far as what the land is that it's describing for this process. And for the Second Amendment, where they say that it's common knowledge what the Morgan parcel is, that's not common knowledge for me and to anybody that I'm familiar with. And that was the justification for changing the scope of the property in the Second Amendment. So, the representation in the amended and restated development agreement references the Second Amendment as a minor wording change or legal description. It does not talk about the scope of it. Is significantly larger between the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, or the First Development Agreement and the Second Amendment. So my concern is that and it also describes in the Second Amendment that all the property that's described in that amendment is owned by the original person submitting all of these, the First Amendment and the original developer agreement, when in fact it actually encompasses more land than what the original development agreement, it encompasses land that's owned by other property owners. So it's not clear, it's not consistent, and so my concern is that this is not a valid contract. And then on top of that, I'm really concerned about the traffic study being so old, and I am really uncomfortable with making it a conditional acceptance based on our staff approving a new traffic study. I feel that we need to have a real thorough traffic study before I would approve any developer agreement or application such as what we're looking at right now.
Councilor Mayhew.
I wonder if the city attorney could help me understand. It's my understanding that in the proceedings that we're currently involved in, that we're looking at those matters that are within the record. I'm pointing to this binder, which I believe to be the record. And that if there are concerns that exist in the universe of possible concerns, but they're not in this binder, then we don't look at those. We look at those that are raised within this binder. Is that a correct understanding?
That's correct.
And so then, with regard to the items that were just being mentioned, we would need to see those items being raised in the record in order for us to focus on them. Is that true?
Well, yes, but even that would not, with respect to the prior amendments to the agreement, that would not be sufficient, because the time period for any challenge to any of those amendments is long gone, and they were superseded by the terms of the amended and restated agreement. So whatever concerns might be articulated about those have no bearing on the application that's in front of you, and they have no bearing on the amended and restated agreement.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sunwell.
I move to call the question.
Second.
Motion has been made to call the question and seconded. All those in favor for calling the question?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes 6-1. So with that, there's no further debate. I assume that was a motion on the original motion, since there was no motion, there was no sub-motion made.
Well, we took a while to get back here. What is the motion on the table?
The motion on the table is to approve, adopt resolution 18-111, resolution
1461.
adopting findings of fact. So you're basically, the motion is adopting the Salish.
The findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval as they've been amended by the various motions of council this evening.
There were 9 motions.
as amended by the 9 motions tonight. And again, now debate is over. This is a closed record, so there's no public comment. So we're going to move on to the vote. Everybody understands what they're voting on? We're voting on the original motion, right?
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes 6-1. Congratulations, Terry and Rachel. It's been a few years. But, well, you got there. All right.
And I just state for the record that on behalf of the tribe, we thank you for your incredible perseverance, your due diligence. You guys are really amazing that you looked at everything carefully, and we're happy to collaborate with the city in this next venture. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Look forward to working with you. All right, with that, why don't we take about a 5-minute recess, council, and no later than 20 minutes after 6, we'll reconvene for our special budget workshop.
So maybe I need to reconsider reasons.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, yeah,
I get
30 seconds.
This ought to be good. Don't skip washing your hands.
Serious? He sat there talking the whole time and didn't do his business? Once you see him walk back in that door, we're going. Okay, Mark, that's your cue. I call the Snoqualmie City Special Budget Workshop, Council Workshop to order. I don't have my city clerk here, but I think we've already taken roll call earlier, so we'll just make sure she notes the same. We have full attendance here tonight from all our elected officials. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robert, our finance director, to lead the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. So tonight we have an updated workshop agenda to 6 o'clock, but obviously 6:21. Budget overview and the 5-year forecast discussion. So I'm going to get into that a little bit. And then following that will be Parks and Public Works. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll wrap up with follow-up items for the next council workshop, which of course is on Thursday. And I appreciate everybody's time to make room for the 5th and final workshop. At 5 o'clock on Thursday, we'll present the mayor's transmittal letter and final discussion on assumptions. 5:30 capital projects overview. And again, we're going to do an overview of the existing capital schedule right now that we're operating under. And then in the spring, we're going to have more of a protracted conversation on capital projects. 7 o'clock would be further discussion on budget enhancements and then next steps following that. So just to review, I wanted to just show again the 3 pots so we can kind of keep on the same track here. So again, we have the general governmental funds, includes general fund, related reserve funds, and other reserve revenue funds such as REIT, includes special revenue funds such as grant funds, community development, streets, and programmatic funds such as human services and the arts. If you recall in some of the department conversations, we as a department are going to evaluate making sure that all the funds are needed and everything is in the correct pot. So we're going to be doing obviously a lot of cleanup coming out of this in the springtime. And then of course we have capital funds. That includes funds that are used for capital expenditures such as sidewalk repair, Meadowbrook Bridge maintenance, and Riverwalk construction fund. And I also put internal service funds used for capital equipment replacement, our IT, R&R, and facilities, little separate pot. Then we have the utilities funds there. Includes operating and capital funds attached to the city's utility enterprise and rate revenues, included water, wastewater, and stormwater. It includes the debt service funds related to the utilities. And so we did work on a 5-year forecast. And again, this is the first time we've done that in-house. We built a model in-house. We used an outside agency, and Drew actually updated the model this last time, but we built this from the ground up in an internal model. And to tell you how complicated it is, we ran out of space in the model. We can't create any more charts, so this is what you get for now.
I assume these are in millions?
Yes, and we did forget the little label that says in millions in this chart. I do apologize. We'll add that back after the fact. So you can see for a 5-year forecast, what I have is the growth rates underneath, and I have the totals up top. So again, general fund and reserves. So this is the general fund plus the general fund contingency, the general fund reserve. So everything related to the general fund, that includes the reserve contingency fund that is the set aside for sales tax for construction revenues. You can see 17.4 million in 18, 18.9 in 19, and then you can see the growth rate. And again, you can also see the impact of some of the proposed expenditures in 19 and 20. So as you know, we were spending down some of the reserves, and you can actually see the decrease when you go into 21 and 22 based on previous years, spending those extra fund balances this year, spending it down a little bit. Special revenue funds, you can also see that same impact as well of the capital, especially some of the funding we're doing out of streets and out of REIT. You could see that decrease going into 21 and 22. So we're still funding those, but not as aggressively as we are in 1920 as we go into here, because again, as the council's seen in previous workshops, we're doing one-time spending on capital that's more aggressive than previous years. So capital funds there, you can see again, the increases in 19 and 20. That capital fund revenue, that large jump you see in 19, that's actually due to the creation of the facilities capital fund that we're proposing in this budget. And I'm going to discuss this a little bit in future slides here. And so that's what that one-time bump is to set aside that money. We are not, that's the set aside capital fund that we are not earmarking anything towards. We're going to revisit that in the spring and have a longer discussion on that actual fund. But we're going to actually start now with $2 million the first 2 years of funding that fund. And then we have a support transfer. We're programming at $500,000 for the years 21, 22, 23 in the model each year. Internal service funds, again, that's IT, fleet, the facilities maintenance, and also there's a fund for this building as well. You could see the increase there due to some of the fleet expenses that we built into the budget, and then we grow it about 4% a year after that. We hold the support transfer steady from 21 to 23. We also assume on the utilities fund a bond issuance of approximately $7.8 million in 2021 and future modest rate increases to fund long-range capital projects, and that was a plan all along, so this is just built into the budget, and it's conservative in this budget. So again, this is just a rule of thumb. This is 5-year revenue forecast. Pretty much everything after 2 years is throwing a dart. This is if everything holds steady. This is not factoring in a recession. This is not factoring in downturn. This is not factoring in grant funding for some things, items in capital that might offset. This is just status quo. And so on the expenditure side for all funds, you can see with the general funds and reserves, you could see again, the aggressive expenses in 19 with the new set-asides we're doing. So that's actually considered a transfer out. That's weaved up into that, but we're setting aside that money. So it's actually coming out of the general fund, going to another fund. So that's what is taking up those expenses there. And you can see that downward, and also investment in capital in 20. So you can see in 2021, you can see there's a decrease in expenditures, and then you can see kind of the natural growth coming 2022 and then beyond. Special revenue funds, same thing. You can see where the investment was. Same thing with capital. Again, we're making, like in streets, for example, we're making aggressive investments in 2019, and some also carrying over in 20, and then it drops off. So you can kind of see that. That's because it's weaved into the special revenue fund category. Utility funds, again, you're going to see drop off in expenses after the initial proceeds of the bond is spent, and then you can see 2021 where the bond issue has already been spent, and then you can see 2022 where we are anticipating that issue in late 21 that we're factoring in, so you can see it going down and then coming back up again. So again, this is just a rule of thumb. This is all our best assertions right now kind of put on one slide, so to get in the weeds, there's a lot here, of course, but this is just our best guess right now if we were holding everything constant over time.
Robert, can we in a future presentation, it's hard for my brain to hold a whole expense chart together with a revenue chart just to see how they track together, in order to graph those out. So
we ran into a limitation on the spreadsheet, so we will present it on Thursday.
You're getting that.
Thursday we'll have some linear charts of this information.
Great, thank you.
So then drilling down to the 5-year forecast on general fund. you can see property tax, and I'm going to go into, I have a graph on the next page that will go into what happens if you, a scenario where you do take the 1% or you don't take the 1%, so I'm going to show that on the next slide. But if you, assuming that council takes the 1% each year, this is the property tax growth. The average growth rate annually is about 6.2% over the period. Utility tax, the average growth is about 3.8%. General sales tax, and I want to touch on that a little bit, that's about 3.6%. I'll be honest, I've heard some voices in the community erroneously stating that sales tax might be hurting and local businesses might be hurting. We're not seeing that in the numbers whatsoever. Right now we're seeing still a strong retail sector. We're also seeing a strong restaurant sector citywide, and we anticipate that to continue to grow into the forecast. Again, this is not anticipating any economic downturn, and if the Economic Development Committee would like me to come back, I'm happy to discuss either there or F&A in more detail about the sales tax numbers, but I did want to address that. Again, I think there's some misinformation going on there. Restaurant sector is strong.
So this is still in millions, right?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry, we forgot the label there. We'll relabel it and send it out.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're in big trouble.
No.
Well, I wasn't sure.
Some
if there
cities
was
it might look like that,
a
but not us.
percentage or something.
I'm sorry?
Without the millions, it's kind of unclear what we're talking about.
Sorry, it is in millions. Sales tax for public safety, again, that's a different allocation from the state, so that's a separate centrally assessed formula, centrally allocated formula we receive from the state for that money. B&O tax, again, 2.1%. That's if we everything held steady. Licenses, permits, and fees, the increase in that category over time is due to an increase in the charge-outs from the general fund to other funds for central services such as finance and administration, and that is reflected in our line items under license, permits, fines, and fees, and that's what you see the increase. Bulk of that increase is due to that. And again, community development is not included in that, so community development fees are not in this chart. Transfers in, I wanted to show that on a separate line item. It's approximately 1.65 million in 19 and 20. That drops to 1.15 million. And the property tax revenues also assume the beginning of the Salish impact, meaning some of the property valuation coming online in 2021 and 2022. That's our best guess right now. And also carrying into 2023, assuming that there would be home growth by then, at least small, modest amounts, so not a large amount in there at this point. And with sales tax, I did want to make a caveat that we're not growing it with any additional brick and mortars. They're just kind of general, just the general track what the city's on, getting growth from online retailing, getting growth from restaurants, and then also we did build in some increase for retail and services at the expanded Salish Lodge in the future.
So you want us to hold questions to the end of the presentation?
Go ahead, if you want.
Well, the only thing I'm just looking at that gray line transfers in and looking at the explanation for it. So we're bumping a number up on the revenue area called transfers in so that we can bump up a line in the total expenditures area called transfers out. If we just left them both off, wouldn't that give us a better picture?
We could, but I'm trying to itemize the transfers in one place. That's why I'm trying to show them in and out, and I actually have all the itemized transfers on another slide here. So I kind of toyed with this too, where this is the best way to show it because I want to show the council, obviously, transparency of what we're doing. So I did highlight it as different. We could break it out, and I could show you, if you want another chart where I just take it out, I could do that too.
Well, I mean, I can do it in my head there. The thought, in 2018, I thought there were a couple million. I thought there was a fairly, well, 17, 18, so the biennium. There's a fairly large amount of transfers that went to, I'll use the word building fund, although we didn't have one, but that went to build facilities type expenditures, or facility fund, I guess. Anyway, and it was more than 150,000.
This is just into the general fund, so that didn't touch This is just into the
Right,
general
so
fund.
all I'm getting at is like, sometimes we're kind of running this thing through the general fund, it goes in and then it goes back out, or anyway, just give some thought to that. I just don't want us, so the thought, I just want us to be clear on comparatively, what have we been doing with these non-recurring revenues, and kind of make sure we can kind of see what have we been doing historically versus what are we doing now. And I'll just leave it. I don't need to belabor that more now, other than to tell you just these questions that I just mentioned to you come up when I look at this, and to the extent they do with others, you might want to think if there's a way to perhaps make it a little clearer. Just, I'll leave that with you.
It is, I think, as we go through our cleaning process, because this is exactly what I identified where, like, for example, for some of the capital costs, like for streets, we added a support transfer to REIT. And REIT actually had a debt service transfer. I moved it back. So there's those little cleanups, and we can come back to F&A because we're going to do quarterly financial updates anyway. So we can come back after the fact and flesh those out a little bit more with you. But yeah, totally agree.
Just a quick question. I appreciate that we're getting into a little more of the weeds here because it's starting to help connect some of the dots.
Sure.
But I am a little confused, and maybe you can clarify. Slide number 4, when you have 5-year revenue forecast, your general fund and reserves for 2019 says 18.9 million.
Yes.
But when you go to the slide on page 6, when you sum it up, it doesn't equal 18.9 million. I'm trying to figure out where the difference is. For 2019, it either...
Okay, yeah, I do apologize about that. So that is actually including all of our reserves as well. So I should have said all general fund plus reserves. This chart here is just the general fund itself.
Okay, so if I want to do the math, the reverse math, I just take what it was on the previous one, in round thousands of dollars.
Correct.
It'll give me roughly what the reserves are. Okay.
And I did, on this chart, I did put a lot of thought into, do I show all the funds together? But again, I want to try to make a clear picture here of what is just the general fund. And because we've had transfers going from one fund to another, again, Councilmember Mayhew, this goes back to, we have a lot of commingling going on that we're going to have to break out later. So that's some of the housekeeping that we have.
It might be useful to have a line in there just to finish out the 5-year forecast of the general fund, this one, to throw in a line for reserves, just so we can kind of see, if you're going to have these two charts roughly back and forth, it'd be nice to know what those reserves are, because it clearly looks like you're looking to spend some of the reserves. So it'd be nice to know what those are.
When, yes, we can come back Thursday with that, sure.
All right, thanks.
Councilman Shepherd?
Licenses, permits, fees, and fines. You have an average of 18%. How do you get 18%? Oh, well, never mind. I'm looking at dollars versus percentages.
So I know you're trying to help us see some key things, but just one thought that might help us just really simplify this is if you go back to that pot, you had those pots. If you kind of gave us something where you kind of consistently grouped everything that's in the first pot, and just every time we saw it's just something to think about, because sometimes you're kind of putting in, like, for example, the reserve funds, and sometimes not, and just something to think about is maybe doing it the same way every time.
Okay.
Because we
that,
trip
yeah.
sometimes, but
Sure.
Otherwise you have to kind of try and walk us through it every time. So just something to think about.
Add numbers to that and make it easier. Yeah, sure. Thank you. No, that's good. So back on this, you see the percentage change over time. And again, you can see where we have, I mean, pretty much what I'm trying to go with this chart is we have steady but slow growth. So we're not seeing anything dramatic. We're not putting any large development in the future in this 5-year forecast. We're not putting any large brick and mortar coming to town. So this is just kind of the status quo. This is what we're seeing. This is what we have to work with, so to speak. So this is pretty much what we're trying to outline with this chart here.
Bob?
Just to be clear, this does not include what council just approved tonight for the Sailors expansion.
It does.
It does include
Yes, it
the
does.
revenues?
Yes.
It does.
And the mill site?
It does not include the mill site. And once we have any idea of the mill site, we can produce an estimate and produce a scenario of what that would look like.
But not in this
Not anything right
projection?
now, no. It's a property tax impact.
Before we go on, I'm sorry, I got a question. Back on, I guess it's 5-year forecast general fund, that one. So you're telling me that for 2019, the general fund and reserves revenue is $18.08 million.
Saying the projected revenues with a transfer in. If you less the transfer in.
Without the transfer, it's something less. But in 2 slides prior, you showed me general fund and reserves 2019 as 18.9 without the transfer in.
As I mentioned before, we included all the reserve funds, so we have the contingency funds that we included. And I do apologize. What we should have done was add a line for those extra funds here. It makes it a little bit more complicated, but again, that was showing the additional reserve funds plus the general fund. So everything that is general funds. This is just showing our main general fund here. And the problem that we have, and this is just how it was set up before I got here, probably would have done it differently. But we have transfers between those 2 funds. I'm trying to clean up the one fund, and that's why I just want to show the general fund on this slide.
Okay, so guys, as I said on other charts, I'm just looking for the numbers to add, and then I'm happy. Are you going to revise this chart to include those added numbers?
We will revise it to include the separate funds on here, yes, but we'll have it a different line item below. And this is just the general fund, so if I've just taken the general fund, that's what this is.
I only asked you about general fund. I understand that this was general fund, but the chart revenue numbers represented on 2 separate charts for general fund do not match.
Again, as I said before, this is not just the general fund. This is also the reserve funds. I lumped them together, but that's what I can add is a line for the reserve funds on that chart.
Councilmember Sumwell.
Yeah, so they don't match because you're not including reserves on this.
Correct.
So what's interesting is, and I'm bad at math, but backing into what our reserves are, I sure thought we had more than $820,000 in reserves.
Oh, we do. This is not showing reserves. So as they mentioned before, we're going to have a chart.
18.9 minus 18.08 should back me into reserves, right?
No, we don't. We're not showing reserves on that chart.
Okay.
Wait a minute, you're not showing.
18.9 included reserves, right? Back up 2 slides.
Okay. 2 slides previous.
This is just revenue, so this is not actually the fund balances.
Gotcha.
behind.
Okay.
So these are reserve funds, any expenditures out of the reserve funds, and I can argue that there shouldn't have been expenditures out of the reserve funds, as you know. And that's part of the problem here.
So that is just general fund revenue.
Correct.
Does not include
This does not include
reserves.
fund balances, no.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to try and help explain my understanding of what's going on here. Is that, and understand that this team that we're looking at didn't create this. This was created over many, many years. It's a setup that they've inherited and they're trying to work with. And you've heard a couple comments about what they want to do in the future to try and revise how it's working. But what they're dealing with is that historically, if you think of what we all think of as our general revenues, general fund revenues, those don't all appear in the general fund. Okay? So there's a specific fund, has a number 001. Okay? There are other funds with different numbers, and therefore they get accounted for differently, that are also general funds, but they're not the general fund.
G, big G.
Okay? And so what has happened over time is that some of our revenues go directly to one of these other funds, one of these other general funds, not the general fund. So I think what is going on is that my perception is that the staff is trying to that they're trying to be open with us on the assumption that we've understood that and have an understanding of all those different funds. And so they're trying to sort of group these things so that we can see the total of what's going on with general funds, even though they're plopping into different individual funds. And I think what you're hearing them say is in the future they actually want to get that sort of put back together. But right now, so what happens is when they say the general fund, that's some of the revenue. When they say general funds and reserve funds, they're trying to capture some of the other ones because some of the revenue plops straight into those. And that's what's going on here. And that's why you see different numbers. They're not failing to add the numbers up. What they're doing is sometimes showing us the general fund and sometimes grouping other stuff. So that they're trying to find a way to give this to us in a meaningful, put-together way that we can evaluate, while at the same time not being transparent that these are actually in multiple funds. That's the tightrope that I see them trying to walk. So for what it's worth, I sort of encourage them to not worry so much about the individual funds and just put them together if they're sort of all general funds, try and give us some group numbers, but they're trying to find the best way to do it to make it more meaningful for us. So maybe I just share that with you because it's not that they don't know how to do math, it's that they're showing us different things.
Yeah, the problem, and to Councilmember Mayhew's point, again, there's a lot of housekeeping. We're doing this budget in an extremely condensed version. Perfect world, we would have started this in February, honestly, especially with the new process. And so we had the bond issue, we had the goals and objectives. So apologize for the delays. And of course, I jumped into this and had to pretty much create everything from the ground up. So that's kind of what we're working with. So trying to show it together. So one of the problems that we're having, we talked
Sorry, I was just going to say, so maybe to my fellow council members, if we could feed back to them which things we find the most useful, that might help guide them to give it to us then in that way we find them way most useful, and we kind of get to something where things are kind of tying slide to slide because we're doing something consistently, but they kind of need to hear from us on that.
So again, kind of tying into what Councilmember Mayhew said, when we have a general fund reserve. So for example, we called, right or wrong, we called the construction revenues that we take from sales tax and put it into another fund. We called that a general fund reserve or contingency reserve. I probably would have renamed it something differently. I probably would have put it in a different fund, but we're going to go there eventually. We don't have that valuation, but the problem that we had as far as trying to show this chart is the fact that we have those transfers in. You see part of that's just a program stormwater. That's the 1.5 million you see, but the rest of that money, that 1.5 million, we're actually taking from the general reserve, with a contingency reserve fund that is considered a general fund. That's the problem to show this. And again, I do apologize the way it was set up. There was no good way to show this. So we're trying to clean it up. And you're going to see that in the following slide here.
So if I could, Mayor, just to my fellow council member who was asking, why do we have, Mr. Sunwald, why do we have a number up here in a reserve fund? That's not the amount of reserves in the fund. It's the amount of revenue in that year that will go into that fund. Because instead of it going to the general fund, previously it's been assigned to that fund and he hasn't had a chance to unassign it like that. So this is the revenue, not the fund balance. The revenue going into those different funds is what he's trying to clarify.
Okay. So again, when we go back to property impact, so again, I wanted to show the property tax impact on the general fund. Again, if I'm saying general fund, it's pretty much definition of what are the main revenues tied to the city, what is the main thing we have to work on as far as sustainable revenues. So not counting REIT, not counting special revenue funds, not counting gas tax or restricted funds, but just what do we have to work with? What's the sustainability? And so when you talk about the 1% and taking the 1% or not, there is an impact on the sustainability of that revenue source as far as property tax. So if I'm showing total revenues in our general fund, so again, all of our taxes, anything coming into our main operating fund, you can see where we have a line on top where it says general fund, or if I don't take the 1% below, and we don't take the one, say council chooses not to take the 1% for the 5 years. I wanted to show what that difference is over time. Now, again, it's not a straight 1% because when you have new growth coming in, so for example, next year or the year after, you're going to have that.
Point of order. Is the agenda bill before the council a 1-year property tax increase or a 5-year property tax increase?
It's 1 year. It's just showing the effects of 1 year in any single year, taking it and not re-implementing it for 5 years. That's the cumulative total. That's the impact. The double,
The point of order is, I think, if I may, the 1% is for 1 year. If you're assuming that we might take it or not take it in 2020, that's a huge assumption.
we were asked to show the difference. We're showing it on a projected, because we're showing you a 5-year expenditure projection.
Well, the mayor left, so Mayor Pro Tem.
Go on.
We can set this aside and go on to some of this and come back.
So again, with the updated revenues, what we have to come in, and I had a request to show what we're actually using from fund balance to make this work. So maybe hopefully this slide will put some of the pieces together for you a little bit. You can see the property tax. Here's our estimated actual for 2018. You can see our estimated budget for 2019. You can see the percent change from one year to another. 20, same thing, percent change over 19. Then you can see utility tax, 4.2%. You can see again 8.3% change. So general sales tax, same thing. So you just run down the list, and then I'm saying what we need. We have transfers coming in, so those are the same transfers in I showed you on the previous slide. Miscellaneous intergovernmental, and then because we are spending fund balance, what fund balance do we need for the expenditure? So again, I'm trying to match the two slides. Trying to match the expenditure slide that I'm going to show you in the next one with the general fund. So again, that 1.05 million, and I apologize, I should have put in millions dollars on here. That's trying to connect the dots, so to speak. So when you're talking about reserves, for the 19 budget, we're using approximately 1.05 million of those reserves to fund the budget.
And what do we have in general fund reserves now?
We have, and I do apologize, it's the one slide that we were not able to get to when we had computer problems this evening. Hold on one second.
Was that to encourage increasing the IT budget, or was that just?
No comment. Shut me off. Our estimated ending fund balance, again, this is all of our general funds reserve. So this includes, again, all the funds I was speaking about earlier as far as the contingency fund that we're setting aside from construction, plus the general sales tax, plus our property tax contingency fund. So this is all of our general fund reserves. Our estimated ending fund balance in 2019 is 4.709 million. And so that's after 19, and when we get to 20, that estimated fund balance again is I'm sorry.
You said 4.097?
4.709.
4,709,000.
Yes. And the ending fund balance for 2020, our estimates is 3,652,587.
Peggy, you had a question?
Yeah. Sales tax, public safety, negative or 7.8%. Can you talk to that?
That was just a rounding. I need to look at that. I'm sorry.
The estimated fund balance needed for expenditures, we've got a negative 44%.
Between the 2 years, 19 and 20.
Yes.
It's dropping.
I'm not sure what that percentage does for you, though. It just says you're spending less in 2020 than you did 19 out of it.
Yeah, we're taking less out of the reserves in the second year. That's correct.
Oh, that's out of reserves.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I do want to double check on the one thing on the public safety. I do want to double check that number, so I will get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Rob? Just quick math here. So the 1.05 is slightly less than 25% of our fund balance, 22-ish% of our fund balance.
Right.
Is what
So our target
we're
is
asking to spend in 2019.
Correct.
So we'll have spent half of our fund balance by the end of 2020.
So the fund balance, so our target fund balance is actually the best practice, and actually the financial policy here is a little over 10%. We did accumulate almost over 40% as far as what our projections are for the end of 18. So we did not spend some of our fund balance for capital, again, with the set-asides for capital, and that's why we're increasing our capital spending to meet those needs. And we're setting aside some of that money for the new capital facilities fund that we're setting up for future projects in the city. Some of it's accounting. It was just kind of sitting there. Some of it's not going to be spent. It's just moving it into a capital fund. I hope that makes sense.
Can you repeat what the fund, how much is in the fund balance then to start?
Sure.
4.7.
And again, I really apologize. This is the slide I wanted to show, and we had some issues this evening.
4.709.
So ending fund balance projected for 2019, again, if no other changes are made to the budget right now, that ending fund balance would be $4,709,286. And for 2020, that ending fund balance is $3,652,587.
And
What's the end of 18 then? I'm sorry.
what's the,
And end of 18, the fund balance is $6,834,255.
and your prior statement is our goal was to have a reserve of 10%?
Correct.
So in 2019, our reserve should be $1.9 million? 10% of operating?
If you kept it, now the acceptable practice or the best practices out there is 15%. We want to go 20% just because of future spending that might happen, future items that might come up in the next 2 years. And just because we need some further analysis for some of our funds as well. So we're recommending the 20% target at this point. But you are correct. The city policy is slightly over 10%.
Which would be almost $4 million.
That is correct.
Next.
What page are we on?
Page 5.
Great.
So this is the
Orange page.
updated expenditures. And again, I kind of wanted to show everything that's coming out of the general fund. Again, what is coming out of it? Administrative departments or operations, Snoqualmie Police Department, Fire and Emergency Management, Parks and Landscaping, the general fund support from Community Development, Street Maintenance General Fund support, Capital Facilities Fund. This is the new fund I have mentioned from General Fund support. The 2011 Bond Debt Service, and the Human Services Fund General Fund support. And then I also, what we built into the expenditures, we built a 2.5% contingency each year of the biennium. So we built a 2.5% contingency in 19, 2.5% in 20. I wanted to show this on this chart. The remaining non-departmental budget is below, and you can see the total expenditures there. And we did evaluate the Community Development Fund and determine that it needed an increase of approximately $100,000 for continued support. So again, that is a fund we're closely evaluating for its sustainability. I'm going to come back to that for a minute. So it's just a graphical version of the updated revenues. And again, on the general fund itself, you can see I did add the transfers in. I did add the estimated fund balance needed for expenditures to just show what portions they are that are supporting those general fund expenditures that you saw on that previous page. So you can see about 9% is the transfers in, 5% is the fund balance needed for expenditures. 41% approximately is the property tax, 16% utility tax, 10% sales tax, 2% the public safety sales tax, 4% B&O, and then 10% license, permits, fees, and charges out. So that, again, equates to 19.1 million. And so at expenditures, you can see the same thing. We're trying to match the two slides. So you can see Fire and Emergency Management at 17%, Snoqualmie Police 27%, admin departments 21%, non-departmental 4%. You can see I also built in the 2.5% contingency expenses. That's about 2%, or again, 2.5% if we round it, of course. 2011 bond debt service, about 1%. The general fund support for human services, 1%. Capital facilities, 2%. Street maintenance, 3%. Community development, 3%. And parks and landscaping, 11%. And I won't go over, but we also have the 2020 slides on that sheet as well. So back on the support transfers, I wanted to show this again updated. So again, we're trying to house everything in one place. And I want to point out, everything in red here. So when I talk about the way we commingled funds in the past, we're trying to get past it. And so, for example, in our contingency reserve fund set up from construction revenues, we had some transfers out for operations. We want to avoid that in the future. And some of the, or excuse me, for some of the small capital. So like, for example, Jeannie Hansen field maintenance, fire equipment replacement, Meadowbrook Bridge, I moved those into the general fund to have just the straight general fund, to have it in one place, to have the operations in one place. And so you can see all of the transfers out there. And I won't go through all of them. If you have any questions, let me know on these.
Just ask somebody to correct the spelling on Jean Hansen.
Okay.
We'll get you correct. It's a fairly important thing. All right.
Everybody good? Do you want questions and suggestions now, or do you want to wait until next time?
Go ahead, so we can come back to you next time.
I'm pretty simple when it comes to this stuff, and I think the Parks and Public Works Director would say, as I've said before, I'm kind of a checkbook kind of guy. What I put in must come out, what I would take out must go back in. And I'm having trouble finding how this stuff balances. And I see that in these slides. I get there, slide 8 and slide 9, and then the charts do that. But you're confusing me with all these other numbers, because I'm not sure where it's coming from or where it's going. So if you want a suggestion from my desk, it's help me see where it's all coming from or going and get me to the big picture. Because I've seen, we're in our 4th presentation and I don't know what our budget's going to be next year. This is another variation of previous ones. And so I'm just trying to understand, work from big picture out to where everything goes, or work from, where everything goes to back into the big picture. I'm just not sure how we're getting there. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I won't try to make a simple graph, because again, I was trying to show the big picture on that first slide, but again, I know it generated more questions than answers, so we'll try to make that a little bit simpler.
I guess ultimately what I'm waiting for is, when are we going to see the budget? And when are we going to be at that point where we can understand where the money's going and where the money's coming? It seems like it's getting there. It seems like we're getting closer to seeing that, but I've just seen so many numbers in the last 3 presentations. I'm not sure where we're at. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and it's here. It's just we'll try to simplify it. We'll try to make it. We'll try to do a crosswalk, make it simpler, and come back to you.
Yeah, I don't want to get to the first meeting in December and we are still trying to figure out where we've connected all the dots.
Oh no, we want to do it by Thursday. That's our goal.
Because I've seen that happen before. I don't want that to happen to this council.
Thank you. Thank you. And then really fast, there was one slide that was asked for last time.
Sorry, can I just show you something? So on this slide, we have capital facilities fund. I see 2 million, sort of a yellowish pie piece up at about 10 or 11 o'clock.
Yes.
If you go to the chart of transfers, it looks, yeah, that says 3.5 million. It just for what it's worth, I'm not able to quickly translate back and forth, so that's something you might relook at going forward. Okay.
Yeah, some of that's in the non-departmental.
I know it's sort of, I'm sure, I just can't figure out how it.
Yeah,
it's not readily apparent.
Okay, I can go back to that. Sure. So this was asked for last time. This was just the major projects that was in the professional services budget for planning. So we have it on the slide for you.
What?
We've already been through this, right?
What are Ridge ED efforts?
Economic development.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm just curious, is the housing study, where is that part currently? Was that, I know council had some discussion on that.
That's in the community development fund. So we actually budget it in the community development fund.
So it's not a major, you just don't have it listed as a major project. Is that significant?
Enhancement. So it's a
Got
19.
it. Never mind. All right. Got it. Thanks.
This is just in the professional services.
Right.
Okay, and along his last one, what is EDI efforts, is that Canada? What, CAI, what is that?
That's the community attributes. It's community attributes. They're the folks who did some work, I think, in 2017 and carried over 2018 for some of the Ridge businesses. They had some focus groups. Where's Mark? Is he here?
Okay, so we.
It's
so we have that.
it's coming out of that report.
I know, more, where's downtown economic development?
Good question.
I'd rather you just have economic development efforts and not schism the city between Ridge and downtown.
Where's,
Mayor?
is Mark not here? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, I don't think they're actually proposing, this is sort of an internal thing that they have in mind. I think the budget's just the total up in the upper chart. And this was a response of, I think they're just trying to tell us what they're thinking, but they're not asking us to budget those specific line items. The budget will just be the thing up at the top. And so the specific projects, whatever they are, will have to come forward through committees and through agenda bills.
The budget might be right, the thinking's still wrong. I prefer not to see Ridge and downtown separated out, guys.
Bob, did you want to speak to that, or?
I did already, but we can take them both out. We'll just cut them and just call them economic development efforts. We'll put them in a larger
Yeah,
bundle,
I mean,
and there's several efforts going on.
There are
downtown,
very
so.
unique things that need to be sometimes studied or analyzed pertaining to that retail area.
We'll
But
just
if you want
carry-
to put them in one bucket, that's fine.
That's okay, Mayor. We'll just carry the list internally. It's
All right, yeah. You're saying they don't need that kind of detail on a budget
granular.
approved by
Yeah.
council?
All right.
Either that, or if you're telling me there are no good economic development ideas coming from downtown, we got other issues. Economic development is across the community.
I can show you some big dollar figures on investments in downtown.
Oh, I agree.
It's the optics, I get it.
We ready for the public works?
Yep. You got 12 minutes.
Don't tempt me, I can do that. All right. This
Ken
is,
doesn't introduce himself in 12 minutes.
all right, I am, let's see. This is the 2019-2020 Parks Public Works budget, and I am Dan Mersenko, Parks Public Works Director. So thank you, Council and Mayor, and then the folks watching us online. Let's see, we have 14 full-time utilities division employees, 13 full-time maintenance, and 6 professional staff. Won't read the mission and the values. You guys are, I'm hoping you're well familiar with what we have and what we do. I'll highlight the point that my guys do like is the one team, one vision, one dream, and they truly are committed to excellence. They stand by the city, no call too small. We do work directly under the mayor and city administrator, and then collectively with you as council members, and then the committees and the commission. Department Core Services, you'll see on the left are the visibility with parks, urban forestry, and streets. That's what the public likes to see. And although it's out of sight, out of mind, is that Todd absolutely hates, but water, sewer, and storm, only 2 times we'll ever hear anything about that is when water doesn't work. Your bill goes up. Outside of that, usually you don't hear too much about utilities. The Public Works organizational chart, there we go. If you have any questions, it's pretty standard with our department. And then the 2 goals out of 7 that the council approved, we get goals 3 and 4. Number 3 is tied primarily to the infrastructure, meets the current and the future goals. So we work collectively shoulder to shoulder with community development. We work with them on where they're going, what they're doing, and how we're going to meet the needs for the future goal. On the left side, you'll see again, street sidewalks and parks. We typically like to address the community needs within a 48-hour time period for trip hazards, things that they're going to affect them and that they'll see. Potholes, things of that nature, lights out, you name it. And then on the right side, we have the compliance issues, again, with the utilities, water, sewer, and storm. by all means, stop me wherever you like or ask questions as we go along. I'm just kind of trying to cruise through. Goal number 4, this is the protecting services, facilities, events, and enhance the residents' quality of life. So what we do is on the left side here, we look at the open space, the acreage, and what we typically do with miles of trail and the playgrounds mitigated and potholes that we mitigate within the 48-hour time period. We do appreciate and we greatly appreciate, I should say, the playgrounds because of our high percentage of children in this community that you guys allow us to update, improve, and meet the ever so changing requirements for playgrounds. So that is pretty important to us. I know the staff greatly appreciates it and they enjoy doing that. We like working with the Spec Commission to get that done. On the right side here, you'll see the trees and street signs, MUTCD requirements, and then working with our support the quality of life through the utility division and our regulators. Challenges that we have. Everybody's going to tell you, staffing levels. Although we have 33 staff members, the community has grown very quickly. And staff did not grow as quickly as a community. We do try to keep up the best we can, and then it forces us, obviously, to prioritize. We look at sustainable funding. The adequate funding in the general fund is always a challenge for us. Working in the utilities, it's a little bit easier, but nevertheless, still a challenge trying to meet the need. Technology changes constantly, and trying to keep up with that. You guys are going to see us working with wireless meter reads in the utility division, which will be a very nice assistance for us, or something as simple as like a playground and meeting the requirements on our monthly review and checklist that you have to do to stay in compliance with just something as simple as a playground. The visitors downtown, although the downtown is looking absolutely beautiful with the improvements we've done, it also comes with the challenges of trying to keep up with the volume of people that come through, and trying to maintain the garbage and cleaning is just a challenge in itself. And the bike trail that they put in, Brian, up at Snoqualmie Point Park, Raging River. Boy, you think that's been a huge benefit to us, but boy, you look at the volumes of people that have now come to Snoqualmie Point Park, and if you're not familiar with that trail, wow, just trying to keep up with the cleaning and the maintenance. That area now has just been dramatically increased. So, we do have our challenges, and then retaining institutional knowledge. We have a lot of the guys that started at the same time, so they're all at the same age. I didn't help anyone. I hired my ops managers. We're all the same age. So
Dan?
I'm not sure I'm helping myself here.
Dan?
The ability, yes, sir.
You said questions as you go, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Back to that Snoqualmie Point Park, the bike, the BMX, whatever you want to call it, bike stuff, that was done by county or Forest Service or whatever, right?
Correct.
What you're saying, though, is that facility or whatever has drawn a lot of traffic to city-owned property, creating additional garbage cleanup, all that kind of stuff, right?
We coordinate work with the DNR, who owns the parking lot over there right next to Point Park, and with the bathroom facilities that are there and the garbage, and then just the litter. It's taken quite a bit of time for us to actually make the several trips up there, which may seem minor, but it's amazing how much garbage, something that people can generate in a short period of time.
As I recall, if memory serves, we actually agreed to the maintenance of the restroom over in the DNR, the state park, and all that, as part of they did an improvement we helped maintain.
Right.
So we actually have a hand in both sides, the city and the DNR side of that park. The restroom facilities and the parking lot, we do some cleaning.
We do. Litter pickup, cleaning, we send the sweeper through. Right. And then the final one is...
And they didn't provide any ongoing revenue for that as part of the agreement?
No, they don't.
They provide supplies.
They provide supplies, and they provide the maintenance of the parking lot itself and striping. But we provide.
And the toilet that's over there is a pit toilet. It's not is serviceable water or anything else?
Correct.
It's very low maintenance.
But then it flows over into the point.
They provide capital maintenance of the parking lot and the restroom, but not.
Correct.
Yeah.
The daily maintenance.
Daily, right.
Yeah. I'm just saying the overflow, Bob, from the people that go over to our bathroom over at Point Park.
Who are using the city park, right.
Didn't use it, right. It's a good thing, it's not a bad thing.
So we have warrants where we're paying for port potties over there. And say we have pit potties over there at Snoqualmie Point Park?
At Point Park, we have our existing facility, yes, bathrooms, men's and women's.
Is it running water or is it pit potties?
Running water, and
Oh,
then the
okay.
one that Bob's referring to is on the DNR site, it's just a pit toilet.
Okay.
Standard kind of concrete box that they put all up and down their trails and parks, yeah.
What Peggy's referring to is, I'm sorry, Councilmember Shepherd is referring to is, there was a wedding up there, and during our Public Works project, the reservoir, we shut the water off to Point Park, and we had to bring in porta potties for any events
temporary.
over the weekend, temporarily.
When some large events do that all the time anyway. There's
They
always
do.
porta potties
They do.
brought in, yeah.
Last item we had here is adapting with the regulatory drivers, MPDS, Department of Health, and Ecology. So we have two operation managers with us. Brian Kraus is my maintenance operations manager, handles the general fund, meaning streets, parks, fleet facilities. And then we have Todd Saxberg here tonight, and he also is the utility side of that for water, sewer, and storm. So I'm going to turn it over to them so you guys can hear all three of us.
Hi, I'm Brian Kraus. I am the operations manager for fleet, facilities, streets, and parks. And Todd Saxberg is the utilities operations manager. So I have everything other than utilities. What we're going to talk about and focus on in the slide you're about to see are not going to really focus on sort of the impacts of cost of living and sort of expenses increasing over time. We're going to focus on what we're doing differently going forward. The list is not huge. We're not secretly busy building Disneyland or anything like that. We have some key changes going forward. We are the stewards of the city assets, and what we've looked at is how to bite off in small pieces ways to measure programs, parks, and some other programs that Todd and I both run. So what you're looking at here is the parks overall parks maintenance budget summary, and you see inflationary increases, and then personnel annual increases for the related services. So you're not seeing a huge budgetary increase.
All right, so I got to pick, I'm sorry.
Sure.
3% inflationary increase annually for services and supplies. That's your operating assumption?
That is our operating assumption.
How come it's 4.5 and 4% on the chart?
Because, yeah, we'll get there. Here we go. Yeah, so here's what gets you to that 4.5. So the big,
we're trying to do a little more of what you were asking for last time, Councilman Holloway. So the very top box is just carving off that one line, and now there's more explanation of what's going on with that one line.
So that we can highlight the 4.5% as well as the 4.5% in the summary reconciliation table.
He's adding up. Give him a second.
Well, I understand the statement from the prior chart covers the top line. Are 2, 3, and 4 then, were they in the budget, or are they new items on your budget?
it's there. Here, defer to Robert.
This goes back to the base request, if you remember a few workshops ago. If there's any base adjustments, meaning any adjustment that's just part of the standard operating procedure of the status quo of the department, that's what we're calling out on these slides. These are not the enhancements. That's on a different slide. So this is anything that's just necessary to maintain what they're doing today. That's not considered an enhancement.
Yeah, we have enhancements coming up that we'll walk through one at a time. So the only real difference that we see here in the parks maintenance budget is we're relocating funds from a parks program into streets maintenance. Again, it's a budgetary cleanup that Robert's working on.
And box 4 was along the lines of what Councilmember Mayhew was suggesting, which was list your big things that moved everything around, and then take the last 15 or 20 whatever items and roll them together into one
Right, but
Other
that's still
miscellaneous,
on the, you know, other, there are minor enhancements.
Other minor noise,
They should have
you know,
been on the
pieces.
prior chart, not here. And so we're saying we're gonna spend 70% more, 2018 to 19, on fleet services.
Because of the reallocation issue that you were talking about, right, Robert? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Remember, we under-collected because we thought we were.
Yeah, but these are also the guys that do the maintenance too, which throws me off. Fleet services,
they
they
still
are the
charge it out.
recipients of those monies, as well as they don't, it's.
It's two separate departments, so pretend like they don't know each other. Even
This
though
is
they're
their
the same
donation
people.
to that fund that they spend.
Right, so again, parks maintenance is in the general fund. So it's
Okay.
still being charged out to the fleet fund, which is an internal service fund. It's all under Parks and Public Works. Some cities' fleet is separate, but of course, we're a smaller city, so it's under Parks and Public Works here.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So we've seen these massive increases in the ER&R charge-outs in a number of places, and I've heard that there's some other places where there's offsetting. So what would be really helpful for me is if we could show on one chart kind of the pluses and minuses so that we can see how that all nets out. Because I'm just making notes, and my notes are after in many of these departments, ER&R, meaning these are the things I'm noting to come back to and at right now raise questions about. So if you could give us a chart that kind of shows how that all nets out, that would really help me a lot.
Or how everything's been removed or reallocated.
Well, right. So, I mean, if I see that at the bottom of that chart, the total charge outs in 18 and the total charge out in 19 are pretty close, that's going to go a huge distance towards relieving my concern. And then, fine, you can explain to us kind of the recharges, and I suspect we'll largely defer to you, but or maybe not, but at least if we could see in total, I'm really worried that these things, I don't recall yet seeing where there's some department with a huge decrease. So and maybe it was there and I just don't remember it, but if you could just put that all together for us, it will mean that's a big issue right now in my tracking, just so you know.
Looks like they're doing that right now. It used to be for tree replacement. It was in his budget, and it's moving to another street maintenance division.
The street tree replacements charge the ER&R fund?
No, I'm just talking about movement of things moving between one budget and another. It looks like they're showing you that they've moved the street tree replacement budget from this budget to the street maintenance division.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Sorry, just to be clear, my comments were specifically on the ER&R fund charge outs, okay? Okay.
Matt, I guess I got another
Councilmember Holloway.
question. If I look at this in the next chart, in this chart, the equipment increases by 70%. In 2020, between 19 and 20, it increases by 7.6%. I guess I have a philosophy question. We made a math error, and we took 2 years under funding. We're correcting math, but are we taking 2 years to get it back, or are we trying to get it whole in 1 year? What's the recovery time for ER&R to get back to appropriate funding?
Yes, so right now with ER&R, and a compliment, Drew's been working very hard with Don and the team at Public Works to try to get to the bottom of this. We still have some, this fund will take a couple more months of getting a real analysis, doing a full needs assessment of it. But right now, at this point, for example, hold on just a moment, let me pull it up. Let's see. 2021.3. And we do have a spending increase. There was no, how many vehicles were purchased this year? Yes. Yeah, two. We have a higher maintenance schedule coming in next year, so we have, that's part of the reason for the increase we have in 19 is the purchasing of new vehicles. So you are going to see an overall increase in spending in that fund. So it does go from an estimate of 871,000 in 2018 to 1.38 million in 2019. And again, it's because there's a lot of fleet coming up for replacement this year, and when we talked about the calculation errors before that we're trying to remedy, that's part of the reason for the jump at this point.
I think Councilmember's question had more to do with the appropriate level of the reserves, not whether how many expenditures would happen in any given year.
Right, the ENR fund should be a yearly, over the life of the vehicle, you take, if it's 5 years, $20,000, divide by 5.
Yeah, we know
you take
some
$4,000 a year.
Yeah, we know some years will be a spike where a bunch of vehicles are replaced, and other years will be lower.
And
Your concern is the overall reserve at the level it needs to be to maintain those or smooth out those spikes, or
Well, and it's also, again, if we took 2 years to dip below, how many years are we taking to get back to the water line? It kind of looks like, if it's 70% last year and 7.6% this year, looks like we're trying to make it whole in 1 year. And we ought to look, your other chart showed me I'm $1.5 million in the hole, so maybe we ought to look at spreading that out.
So right now, if I'm looking at our current estimates through 2020 on the fleet fund,
General fund.
and we're looking at the allocations that we just made, so everything that's in the budget, everything that's included in the new charge outs to departments, our ending fund balance for that fund is still 2.85 million. So that's why we are still examining that fund. But this is something where it's going to take probably 3 or 4 months or so to really dive into it to make sure. We don't want to underfund it right now because there are quite a few vehicles that need to be replaced this upcoming biennium. So we want to make sure that we are funding it. Now, we can make it, it's not ideal, but we could make adjustments after the fact to those allocations if we determine it. But it's something where, because there's, such a large schedule, we still have things that are not funded, such as the fire rig, because the fire rig was actually, the ladder truck was not scheduled for replacement for a few years, but the vendor is no longer supporting the product, so we're moving it up. So we don't have an answer.
Let me ask it a different way. I'm just pulling a number out of the air. Let's say 3 years ago it was at 3.25 million in a reserve, and we said, hey, we think we have too much money in this, and we dropped it to 2.85. Right. And then we came back and said, oh, we think we dropped it too much. We need to go up. To answer your question, I think, is did we go up from 2.85? Are we going to 2.9 until further analysis? Is it remaining status quo? We're going to do further analysis in the next 3 months of the year. What if the conclusion is we need to get it back to 3.25? How do we do that? Is that the heart of your question?
And it's also, is your objective to get back to that in 2019, 2020, or 2021? Do you do it in one
But the
chunk,
conclusion could be, no, actually, our original analysis 2 years ago was fine. We're good at 2.85. We can maybe drop it to 2.75.
Well, and I'm looking, from Robert's comment, the minute you make an estimate, you're wrong. I admit it. I've done it. Do it daily. You've made an estimate of what you think ER&R is. But this still looks like you're taking that estimate and you're trying to fund the deficit in 1 year versus spreading it out over multiple years to make yourself whole, which would be would have less impact on that singular year if you spread it out over 3 years versus 1 year.
So assuming there is actually
Could I clarify,
a deficit.
for example, there is no deficit in this current year. I can't talk
that's
to
the heart of it.
prior administrations here, but there is no
You have a negative
deficit.
balance.
No fleet deficit, Jim.
However you want to term it, in fleet.
Fleet, we had a fund balance of 3.47 million that we began fiscal year 18 with. If I run my model with the assumptions that we have built in for the next 5 years, if I ran it just status quo right now, if I just didn't touch anything, what we put into the budget, I would end up in 2023 with a fund balance of 1.69 million. So the question is that too much? Is that too little? That's going to take further analysis on our end and a deeper dive on the replacement schedule and what is needed in that equipment. But over time, that does go back down again, yes.
Okay.
So we do need, it's going to take months of analysis. It's not an easy question.
Councilmember Ross.
Clarification. So you keep talking about the fleet fund balance. Is it the same? Is it interchangeable between the ER&R? Is that the same?
ER&R
is
is
the same
the
as the
fleet.
fleet
I'm
fund
sorry.
balance.
Excuse my terminology.
And so then
ER&R
you
fund balance.
you have 2.85 right now, or was it 2.85?
That is at the end of, let me double check. Sorry, end of 2020.
Okay.
So I'll go back to.
If we kept the current rates, so with the current rates we have built in the budget, that's what we would end up with. With the current replacement schedule, again, does not include the ladder truck. And so that's kind of the big if out there, because the ladder truck was not up for replacement. So it would draw down that fund more than normal because it's not quote unquote fully funded because it hasn't hit its end of life yet. So I'm kind of in the weeds here, but that's part of our concern of drawing it down too much again, is that if we have something like that that's not supported that we have to replace, hopefully we'll get the grant, but if we don't get the grant, we're going to have to use that funding we're going to have to draw down that reserve, or to draw down that fund balance.
For the sake of time tonight, Council, Councilmember May requested more information to come back showing how those funds are reallocated. More detail in that area. This is a really important and big number area to focus on. We could certainly do more conversation tonight, but do you want to give Robert more time to delineate that a little more and come back with the information, Councilmember May? Yeah.
And we'll do our best we can with this budget. We will definitely be coming back to F&A in the spring to talk more in detail about ENR.
Well, I think during the budget process, they might want more information on that.
I'd like to go with Councilmember Mayhew's suggestion. Let's later on the docket put an ER&R discussion just focused around that. And so we all
The question
understand where
is,
we're going.
because our last workshop is Thursday, are we planning more workshops? That would be my other question.
Well, we have one Thursday, correct? Is it
the final one?
Is it booked, or do you have time to squeeze some more ER&R conversation?
We can definitely talk about ER&R. Yeah, sure. Thursday.
All right. Councilmember May, you look like you have lots of questions.
Yes, I do. Let's leave it at that for.
Just hold it off until. Hold it off till. You want to hold it off till Thursday? Are you okay with that?
Yeah. Well, let's wait till he's got the picture for us, and then let's see what questions get answered by that or don't, and then we can sort of try and wrestle with it then.
Okay, Councilmember Sumwell? Oh, I thought you had your hand up. Were you just stretching?
No, I was just, yeah, I'm good.
All right, very good.
Well, all right, so you showed me a chart prior that said we're taking out of the bank savings account 1.5 or $1.05 million. So that entices me to ask some ugly questions. So I will. We have on there standard practice of replacing 2 playground equipment a year. What's the impact if we go to 1?
What's the impact? 50% difference.
Depends which park you take off the list. No, I just mean, how many parks do we have, playground equipment?
You maintain
12?
half as many parks as you otherwise.
40?
Parks, and I believe there's
30 playgrounds.
So we're going to replace them in 15 years?
every 12 to 15.
Every 12 to 15 years.
And that's the industry standard for useful.
Use the mic, please.
I heard you.
And the 12 to 15 years is industry standard for replacement. So on average, that's what we'd be doing.
Okay.
Councilman May.
So if I could just say that kind of information is extremely valuable to me as a council member. The more that kind of information we get in every department, helping us. So from a policy perspective, the thought that's going through my mind is kind of what are the assumptions behind these numbers and kind of what are you guys accomplishing? Because
what are the
about those revenue lines, you know, it seems to me we need to have a fairly, I don't know if even's the right word, because I don't mean flat. I just mean a very steady. We shouldn't have something that bounces around. I think if these guys are going to make plans that encompass our whole, is it 49 parks? Is that roughly right? 41 parks. So, you know, that it would seem like from a policy perspective, we would want them on a kind of a plan that covers that 15-year life or that we want to steadily fund that. Granted, in times of recession, we may have to really scratch our heads, but as a general matter, it would seem like that's the kind of policy we'd want to buy into and then look to support. And so I really appreciate hearing that kind of thing. It helps me really buy in a lot more to these numbers.
Yeah, and then that
shut me down.
And that's why it's very helpful for my administration to have the council's focus in a particular area, because then appropriate question is, well, is 12 years sufficient, or can we push it to 15? You know, what does that look like if maybe they're a little shabbier, but we could over years, say some are, maybe you want to push it to 11. So it's real, then you're getting really to those core level of service issues that the council should be really most concerned with and focused on. In terms of what the impacts to the community and what they're seeing out there in terms of these levels of service issues.
And keep in mind, Council, we use that funding, Councilmember Holloway, to match RCO grants, CDBG. I mean, we do quite a bit of that as well. So we stretch that $300,000, I believe it is, annually. And we do I think the guys do a great job at stretching out as best they can for the community. And again, that's a highly visible item that the community sees, so.
Right, but that's back to Councilman Mayhew's point. It'd be good on an annualized basis. What percentage of match do we get for parks? Right. That'd be a good number to have.
Is it varying from year to year as far as what grants we get?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions on this particular slide? Move ahead. Street maintenance summary. So there's some big numbers here. What I'd like to point out, we have the inflationary numbers that we talked about earlier, standard theme through here, but what you need to recognize here is that we're looking to go and move to a pavement management program. And what that is taking care of our asphalt assets in the community. We're in the process of doing pavement condition index for the community, which is being updated so we can fund replacement of our roadways before we lose them. An example is, the ridge now is 20 years old. We need to do maintenance on those roads so they don't become similar to some of the quality of the roads in the downtown. And we're going to walk through a little bit in more detail on what those things are.
Do we have or have we considered an ER&R fund for pavement?
So what we have is something like that we're about to show you.
Okay, cool.
Whoa.
That's awesome. It's black, like pavement.
Wow.
We're in there, waiting to see what they are.
Can you help me find where you put that in the slide program? Okay. So here, professional services, so there it is. Okay, number 8 speaks to the pavement management plan and annual budget proposed for 19 at $1.2 million. That buys us basically 2 streets on the ridge. We will also be looking to leverage grant opportunities where we can through the community. One of those grant opportunities being potentially funding the repaving of the parkway, 4 miles, so 16 total lane miles in both directions. So we're looking to leverage that in addition to these funds here. Some of these funds set aside in this program will be needed to help offset other grant opportunities, but we're looking to use this money to leverage as much pavement condition work that we can.
So if I remember history correctly, there was a period of time, 15 years ago, where we, like a lot of cities, from our fleet perspective, hadn't really developed the concept of kind of paying it forward. There was a point in time where we had to, I presume, where we had to both buy vehicles and start saving. Now we have the luxury of getting over that initial hump, and now we just pay for them out of this revolving fund, wrong term, whatever. But so my question is we haven't been doing this for pavement, right?
That is correct.
So we're probably at a point like we were 10, 15 years ago with vehicles where we're going to have this initial ouch moment that once we get that done, we'll be able to 5, 10, 15 years from now be where we are with ER&R on our pavement. Is that correct?
Essentially, yes. What we're trying to do is go with an ongoing program funded so there's continual.
Right, but my point is the streets are already, some of them are already too old. So if we get 2 miles a year, I think is what I saw. Is that what it's 2 miles a year?
Well, we can do roughly 2 full streets a year, depending on the width.
And how many streets do we have?
We have 45 roadway miles.
Okay, so we'll have that all done in 21 years. But the last streets that are 21 years away, that's too long. So I guess where I'm going with this is where is that, have we budgeted for that ouch moment where we're going to have to spend a lot more than what 2 streets a year will get us?
Can we first clarify, we talk about just which streets?
Any streets.
Well, the streets we've built in the last 20 years are going to last them much longer than the streets on the valley floor. So make sure we're clear, talking about the right streets here, because some of these streets are not going to break apart.
Yeah.
They're not going to require the maintenance that we've been putting in.
And keep in mind, as Brian stated, we're trying to work with the DOT on the parkway. So with the 45 center line miles of roadway that we have, take off 16 miles, because you got 4 lanes on the parkway. And when you divide that out, it's 2.5 miles that we're trying to do on an annual basis. At a 12-year mark, you do crack seal. At a 15 to 18-year mark, that's when you start doing some patchwork, or you look at the grind overlay. 12 to 15, you're doing patchwork. 15, you're doing grinds and overlays.
And Dan, that's just on the major arterials, correct?
No, that's just about on any, even your cul-de-sacs. Pavement they need tires, because it brings up the moisture and it keeps it moist. Bob lives on cul-de-sac, so that's going to be our most problematic area because there's no cars. It doesn't work for us. So if that helps you explain why or how we look at roadways and paving and when we do grind overlays and how we accomplish that. What Brian's saying is we're trying to get some grant funding through the DOT. We're trying to work with finance on a plan that we can move forward similar to the R&R fund. That'd be the ideal scenario for us to accomplish.
So are you saying if I exclude the parkway, we aren't really behind? We're not starting this fund too late and there won't be a...
No, I'm not saying that at all. 45 minus the 16, I mean, that's what we're assuming we're going to get out of DOT. So we'll have that balance to work with finance on a multi-year level as to how we can accomplish that task. So you're looking at what, 29 miles center line? Is that making sense or no? Councilmember Mayhew's shaking her
I'm still not, so we have 29 miles
Mhm.
and we're going to do how many a year? Or you're not measuring in miles,
Currently,
though?
we can do about 2 to 2.5 miles a year. That's what we can afford to do.
So that means that everything will have been redone in 15 years. And my question was, is that right?
Yes.
So my question was, are there roads right now that aren't going to make it to 15 years? And if not, then that would imply that we're behind and we need an initial upfront more than we'd like, but
As a grind overlay, no, we're going to be okay. With the reconstructs downtown, because they're much older streets, that is going to take quite a bit more money, but then we get utilities involved, and that's where we get into the reconstruct. That's what we're doing with you guys, curb to curb, and using utility funds to pay for that fund. Now, if you look at it, Falls Avenue, Epsilon, they had a birthday 2 years ago. So now the clock's ticking. You got 15 years. So that's where you're referring to, are we going to make that time frame? We need to look at that. We now have a PCI index contract coming forward.
PCI?
Pardon?
Just acronyms, PCI, Pavement Condition
Pavement Condition Index, thank you. And that's going to tell us exactly what the condition or the strength of that road is, and it'll give us a date of what we need to do when. And that's the information you're looking for, and we will have that for you in spring, probably early spring, if I had to guess. So I think that's the answer you're looking for, and we'll have that around March, if I had to guess.
That helps, thank you.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So I have 3 questions.
Okay.
One is just building off the questions that my fellow council member was just asking. If we think about the next 13 to 15 years, that cycle you referred to.
Right.
When we think about where our current streets, where the condition is, and I heard you say you got to take some of those out because some things are going to be going on because we're doing some things under the streets with utilities and the streets will get repaved. So let's take those out.
Right.
Look at the rest. Would it be reasonable then to say that a 15-year cycle will work because you will prioritize those streets according to the situation they're in? I think that's why you keep referring to this PCI that will help you do
index
that.
number, right.
And so that, if we think about which streets will we get to in 13 to 15 years from now, those will be the ones that are probably in the best shape now and probably receive the least wear and tear between now and then, whereas those that are in lesser shape will be done sooner, so that actually you're going to kind of, you believe you're able to plan it out.
Correct.
Such that this will work over that time frame. Is that a correct understanding of what you're saying? That was my first question. The second is, I just want to question whether this is really at all like an ER&R fund, because I don't think there's any revolving fund here, and maybe I'm misunderstanding. I think it's just a matter of, we've had a sort of free ride up until now, because it all got built, and none of it, the ridge got built, and really none of it needed to have anything done for quite a long time. And now we're sort of growing up, and now we're going to be like every other city, and we're now forevermore going to have a cycle like this where we're attending to our streets on these cycles. Correct. And so this, it's not so much that it's a ER&R fund, it's just that there's going to be an annual spending amount that's going to be more along these lines than the old lines. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes.
We're not going to be building up any fund or anything. I mean, you may from year to year, but it's
An
basically
annual amount that you're going to set aside for maintenance on a
but it's
grind
probably
overlay
spent
program.
down every year. I mean, there's not really anything building up over time. It's just
No, it's a steady level
steady.
amount.
Just that's what it's going to cost us now.
And then you
Every
pick and
year.
choose which ones you want to actually reconstruct versus the grind overlay.
Right, and so you may get a little build up for 1 or 2 years, and then the big project draw.
Right.
But it's not really like a revolving fund. It's just a timing.
Right.
Okay. And then my third question is for the guy that disappeared.
Brian?
Which one?
No.
No?
The guy with Brian.
I was running away.
You felt question number 3 coming. Is, can you just explain to us, because in my mind, I've previously thought about this kind of expenditure, this new, if you will, this significantly changed level of expenditure for our roads, the replacement of the roads. In my mind, I've thought of that as really being a capital type expenditure, but here we're showing it as an operating expenditure. Is that, do you have any thought, are we going to think about this as capital funds, or are we really going to think about it as operating funds, or can you enlighten us any further on that?
It's on my list, of course, because
you're
it's
gonna
kind of
rethink this.
commingled,
Okay.
and I don't want to confuse the council too much on this issue.
All right, I'll leave you with it now.
Okay, so whatever pot of fund, it doesn't matter. What we're trying to do with this budget, and I'll outline the strategy a little bit clearer on Thursday, what we're trying to do here is set aside X amount each year that we're meeting some of the pavement needs, because before there wasn't an allocated
Yeah,
fund.
no,
so
I get that.
It's just being
I'm sending you down the
tabled
wrong
as-
road. It's
yeah.
my fault. I'm sorry. The reason I asked that question is because I know that we have revenue sources that can only be used for capital and in some cases specifically roadways, which is different than our sort of general operating fund revenues. And I was sort of getting at that, but it sounds like you're going to really, I don't need to focus on that much now. You'll kind of,
Let me just do a really high-level summary for the council. So over the past few years, funding on the federal and state level for roads has dwindled, so you're not seeing a lot coming back. We only receive approximately $300,000 in gas tax each year, and that is restricted for roads, but as they said, that can't even overlay one street in the area. And so that's one of the difficulties that we have. And then when you look at the gas tax, it's actually technically not sustainable, because you have, higher mileage or higher fuel efficient vehicles, you have electric vehicles. I believe there's electric vehicle charge from the state, but as we looked at it, we're not seeing anything coming back to us on it. So that revenue source is not going to grow. Weird. So that's where it is burdening the general fund more to try to.
I've been trying to understand your presentation as primarily an operating expenditure presentation. And so I've just been thinking about those revenue sources you showed us on the slide, and I guess I thought that those excluded some of these capital type funding. Maybe they didn't. And so I was just, in my mind, I'm just trying to match up, wait a minute, do we have some expenditures here that have some additional other revenue sources available to help, or not? That's really what I'm trying to get at.
We have support transfers that we're building in to maintain the streets funding. I did not want to confuse council and set up another fund. I just want to show it right now, but we are going to evaluate, what the best course of action is in the future. But the problem is, so we're trying to program transfers each year. So again, we're actually adding $500,000 extra for the next 2 years of funding. Some of it is coming from the fund balance, as we talked about before, to address the capital needs. After that, we are still, you see there's about 700,000 where it says increase in preventative maintenance. There's 700,000 in that will continue for the 5-year forecast that I showed. So it'll continue from 21, 22, 23. Is it enough to cover? No. Do we have to maybe look at other revenue sources in the future? Absolutely.
Councilmember Holloway.
So for the additional $1.2 million, which streets are getting fixed?
So we will come back to Parks and Public Works Committee for further deep dive into that.
Okay, so right now it's an estimate.
Correct.
Okay.
The PCI index will drive that.
Right, we've made some assumptions based on a PCI that was done in 2013. We're having a new one, but we want to discuss those things with the committee before we, set forth and conquer.
Is it fair to say we can estimate that we have at least $1.2 million in each of those 2 years for street maintenance?
Without a doubt.
And the issue I got is I'm taking $1 million out of the savings account. So what's the impact of taking this to 900,000, 800,000 to help offset that draw from savings?
Just means you'll slow down the rate of maintenance and the actual expenditures each year, so you'll have to push those years out.
It'll just get back to the mayor's infamous sink that's dripping, that he's always giving the analogy on, the dripping sink. So pay now, pay later. I mean, it's the grind overlay.
Pay now or pay 5 times later, yeah.
Cheap, yes, yes.
Well, I'm just looking maybe at the installment plan versus pay you all at once.
It's obviously a lot cheaper to just grind 2 inches off, put 2 back versus doing the, the base repair and the patchwork.
Well, I guess I'm looking for Robert to address this too, because I don't think the intention is to make it an unsustainable allocation of monies out of a savings account. It's more finding ongoing revenues that we can commit to an ongoing street maintenance program every year and see what amount of money do we think we can confidently carve out and commit every year to finally getting aggressively on street maintenance the same way we do playground equipment.
And just a comment again about the fund balances, and we're actually going to hopefully show either tonight or first thing Thursday what the targets are. But again, the reserve level of the general fund reserve was 46.4%. I don't know any city that I've ever worked with in my life that has a 46.4% fund balance. So if the council wishes to keep it, they can, but at the same time, it is a very high fund balance. It gets in the question of, are you going to keep the fund balance or are you going to pave streets? And so we're trying to be aggressive to, again, go down to still have a fund target in the future, but spend down some of that fund balance. And then this is one of the activities we would spend it down for.
So in your opinion, though, $1 million out of any reserves is not an issue. It's appropriately going down to appropriate reserve levels.
Correct. And again, the 20% target is still higher than the council policy, much higher. Council policies.
And part of that significant fund balance, as you know, was grown because we were trying to wean off of one-time revenue. So appropriate to put one-time revenues here. They're not quite one-time. I mean, they're going to be ongoing capital upgrades on a 15-year schedule. But as those one-time revenues over the next 15, 20-year horizon shift, we're going to anticipate more ongoing revenues coming into play. Councilmember Ross and then Councilmember Jeans, Shepherd, and then Mayhew.
Okay.
Got a bit of a backup.
This is changing the subject. I have a question on landscaping service increase. It's increasing by 140%. And it states to increase support for trail maintenance and repairs. Are we taking on new trails or trails we just haven't been maintaining, or what is that?
So what we have on the landscapes. Oh, okay. What we're looking at with respect to, I'm going to go back to this one because with respect to landscape services increase, number 11, that particular one is to offset the cost of the contract which kicked in June. So that's to provide funding with our landscape contract, maintenance contract.
Company.
Oh, okay.
So we need to increase that to match what that contract is.
We added some property to that contract too.
We added frequencies and a lot of mileage of roadside mowing and stormwater ponds, that kind of thing. And that's where that 71,000 or the 100,000 is coming from. And then your other question was for trail maintenance and repairs. What that is existing trails. That's not taking on any new. It's to take care of what we have. We're seeing a lot of root intrusion and failure of pavement in our asphalt trails. And it's also to bring in additional mulch for our roughly 30 miles of mulch trails.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Jeans, Shepherd, and then Mayhew.
Many of these slides are identified as streets. And we're using the term roads interchangeably sometime, although frankly, I'm not sure they're really interchangeable, especially downtown. When a street downtown, you can't just do an overlay. You probably have to tear it all up, and you have to do gutters, and you have to do maybe even sidewalks. And you may even have to build the superstructure underneath the street. So should there be a separate category, or how can we understand the city's decision to prioritize which streets to work on when the streets downtown need a lot more, cost a lot more? And do we just need to treat them differently than streets on the ridge?
So the pavement condition index that we're working on right now, consultants working on, will be bringing back to Parks and Public Works Committee, will help establish those priorities. And we'll show you how the roads rank and where we get most bang for the buck. And it will also address the scoring of full construction replacement, which is what we're needing in the downtown. So we will vet that out. We'll be presenting that all to you when we get the condition assessment back.
To the councilman's question, though, where that information will be delineated is in the capital improvement plan when all those streets are listed out, and there's a column on funding source, and so it'll delineate, which you can quickly separate to show which streets are funded out of utility fees when it's utilities underground that can pay for the street versus those putting pressure on the general fund.
Currently, there's a 6-year CIP, and that's what the mayor's referring to, and those are the reconstructs downtown using utility funds to rebuild them all. And that's where you go curb to curb, and then it'll be up to council if they want to include sidewalks, street trees. We do meet the ADA standards for that, and that's a complete reconstruct. The ones we're talking about here are grind overlays, primarily on the ridge, and then some of the new roads that are downtown, but that's going to be a few years out yet because they're brand new.
So Dan, once you've got all the capital facilities plans, or all the streets laid out on that Excel spreadsheet, you can quickly filter it and look at it in 100 different ways based, in other words, if you want to look at it on geographically where streets are located, certain neighborhoods, or by funding sources, or by PCI index rating, or you can sort them
any way you want.
Right.
Yep.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember Jeans? Okay, Councilmember Shepherd, Councilmember Mayhew, and then Sunwell.
Yeah, so going back to the last slide, it would be helpful if we could get 2020 out on the bottom table.
So.
And also I'd like to see 2017 as well. Okay, there was one before that only had 2019. Parks maintenance budget summary.
Right, they did it 2019, and next slide, 2020.
So there's one showing the next, yeah.
Oh, all right.
There's
Got
19, and
Got it.
there's 20.
Got it.
Councilmember Mayhew?
Well, I guess we'll,
You have the calculator out, so get ready.
yeah. I guess we'll talk about this more when this all comes back together, but based on the numbers I'm seeing, look, a 13 to 15 year cycle of spending cannot be met by burning up our reserves. It has to be something that we can sustain year after year after year. And based on the numbers, I don't see how we can get remotely close to this kind of number. So I want to see how we can do this in your future presentations, how this can actually be maintained and sustained over a 13 to 15 year cycle, because it's no good burning up all our reserves in a few years and suddenly finding ourselves unable to pave any more streets and all our reserves are gone. So I just, I want to see how this translates out into a sustainable, not burning up our reserves. Okay, if you think we're over-reserved a little bit, that can play a part, but a sustainable plan is what I would like to see over that whole 13, 15. I'm not asking for a 15-year budget, just a concept of sustainability and where it would get us. So that anything you do to help us kind of see that sustainability, I think will be really helpful.
I would like to show a chart that will show you that, we're still meeting that 20% target and we're providing funding to address the roads. Because again, we are, and I can outline that.
But
I don't want to go beyond 5 years.
Question is for how long?
But just be aware that the council may not agree that we should burn up our reserves on that particular project. There may be other projects that we think some of the reserves should go towards. So help us see how much how do we get this as a sustainable over that cycle time? And then how much of reserves do you want to use sort of maybe in the early years? Okay, fine, but help us see that sustainable picture. One of the great the things I have been tremendously impressed with coming onto the city council is the job that's been done by prior councils and prior administration to make a very sustainable operating budget, a very sustainable city, the way that one-time revenues have been set aside. I think it has been very responsible and something the citizens should be very pleased with. I'm very pleased to be associated with it, and I want us to continue that sustainable future. And that's, so if you could help us see that, that would really help, okay? The sustainability of this.
The problem is when you get into the future, future councils are going to have to take actions. I'm not comfortable with giving you anything over 5 years at this point. We haven't been here long enough we can't crunch that out overnight.
Yeah, no, I've set this up poorly. What I mean to say is how much of whatever vision you can share with us is coming from sustainable sources versus how much is burning up the savings account, the fund balance. That's what I'm trying to get a picture
in other words, if the target is to get our reserves to 20%, which we have no intention to go below the 20% at this time, that's going to be another discussion. It could be 15% if the council so agrees. Whether it's 15 or 20, to get there, and that's, use the phrase to burn up all the reserves. I don't think anyone's intending to do that, but it would get to the burn up would be considered when you hit 15, 20%, you're not.
Yeah, help us see all that.
You're not going any further. So
some of this we have to have further, sorry, Mayor.
Yeah, so you want to know how many years is it going to take before this gets to where we're at the 15, 20% where we're not comfortable burning reserves anymore? Is there another revenue source like Salish expansion or mill site or other things that would come in with reoccurring revenues to take over?
Or to put it differently, maybe we start from the idea of how much could we fund if it was only from sustainable? We weren't drawing down fund balances.
Okay.
What would that look like? And then
starting tomorrow.
Right, and then, okay, so how much are we going to supplement that by pulling down reserves? Help us to get that picture.
That's only a piece of the picture. So the other piece is the council priorities. Do you want to, because we have programmatic transfers each year for sidewalks fund, for example. Do you want to decrease that and increase streets? That would be up to the council.
That's the kind of thing you have to help us see.
Right, to make those decisions. So that's why I'm envisioning a more prolonged capital projects planning process where we can involve the council in making those decisions. They're not something I think that can happen immediately short term, but certainly when we have a little bit more time to flesh it out. Because there's definitely options on the table.
Because I mean, like $250,000 for trees is a big surprise to me. That's the first I realized we had that big a problem. Just help us see what those choices are and how much of that can be done sustainably versus how much we have to dig into reserves to get done. Help us see that.
Yeah, because some of that, do you want to talk about the sidewalk pictures a bit? Yeah. That's an example of a problem that happened kind of overnight and became a very large expenditure for this.
Right.
Takes away from the sustainability a little bit.
So that would be, we're looking at number 12. Number 12 runs parallel with some of the sidewalk tripper projects in a program we'd like to start, which is essentially a 10-year plan to conquer the street tripper problem we have on the ridge. It's essentially 1,200 trees. This methodically addresses, in accordance with a proposal and a presentation that Phil Bennett gave a few weeks back to the Parks and Public Works Committee, where he went through and developed a criteria for replacing the trees based on the condition of the trees and a bunch of other conditions surrounding the replacement of those trees. So there's roughly 1,200 trees. Many of them are the aphid-prone varieties. So this is a strategy to address the replacement of those trees. And we're proposing $280,000 a year to replace roughly 150 trees a year for 10 years, give or take. But that's the target anyway.
So in that price tag, Brian, just to clarify, it's not just replacing a tree. It's cutting a tree down, removing the root system, bringing a new one in, but it's also cutting out maybe a 20-foot swath of soil in that landscape median between the sidewalk and the street, replacing, maybe to a depth of 12 inches to 18 inches deep of soils, and providing drainage, and then replacing some sidewalk panels that have been busted or lifted in addition to that. Now, all that's why the cost is so high per tree or per...
That's exactly correct, Mayor.
Right.
Some will cost more than others. We're looking at an approach where we can go in and conquer a whole street at one time, where we get economies of scale, and we would essentially trench that whole planter strip at one time, fill it up with appropriate plant mix as well as drainage. So we will have a sustainable situation where these trees should last a long time, and we shouldn't have to revisit the sidewalk tripper problem as well as the tree problem. So we'll select trees of a variety that are hardy and not susceptible to pests and disease, and as well as conquer our trip hazard issue.
I think one of our concerns is we're going to anticipate seeing a lot of big trees blowing down in the next 10 years as they get large enough to, with shallow root systems, not be able to sustain the weight or the wind.
Well, that, and we're trying to be proactive as it's gratefully it's heading to the sidewalk, not going to the curb and the road. It will eventually head the other direction. We are trying to be proactive, trying to get on top of it. As you guys saw, Stellar getting ready to go to bid, or we open bids?
Getting ready to
going to bids. And we're replacing every one of the trees, doing a multitude of the sidewalk squares. There's a lot of sidewalk trippers over there that we're well aware of. Just as the mayor described, it's an SR2 development standard for the new installation of the trees. It's something we have to absorb, we have to do. I mean, it's, ultimately it'll be up to you, but that's our recommendation that you guys see in front of you. But I wanted to add, it is not affecting the curb and the sidewalk, or the curb and the street yet, but we do see it coming. It's starting to develop in that format.
What we're trying to do in this budget is carve out a big enough pool of the money that, as we refine those conversations in the early part of the coming year, at least the council will have the tools and the resources to determine how do you want to allocate that, which of these issues and liabilities do you want to really press on. Councilmember Sunwell, I'm sorry, you've been waiting for
Yeah, we could rename that fund No Fall Too Small, if you want to do that. So my question on number 11 was, if you go forward one slide, okay, stop. Go to the one before that real quick. So there's $100,000 of change, right? And the way that was explained, on one hand, is explained to deal with the increased contract from MLS, which I don't remember. Line 11. Yeah. Line 11, landscaping services increase.
Okay, you're not on
Don't
the
move
trees
it.
anymore.
Do
Right?
not move that slide.
So $100,000 increase, and it was explained as I recall, as an increase in the MLS contract. I don't recall the MLS contract being that much, yet it was also explained to be trail maintenance. So I'm really confused. Of that $100,000, what is the MLS portion versus we have some trails that need repair?
Right. You were right on that.
Yeah, it is the NLS. The trail maintenance is in a, not sure where it got rolled up, but this is the NLS, the Landscape Services 11. And so this next slide, wherever it went.
So that's
incorrect.
completely misnamed.
That is incorrect.
Described.
Right.
Which of course begs the question, so 11, the description of 11 has nothing to do with what 11 is about. So where is trail stuff?
I'm going to need help from finance on where that got rolled up.
Well, go to your first slide. It's in there. You didn't list it as an enhancement. Gonna come back on that later. You listed on the first slide, overall budget review, that you were having seasonal staff wages increase. Is that your trail maintenance?
It better not be number 13.
Keep going back.
No, right.
Right there.
No.
No?
That, go to the next slide.
Oh, that's street, sorry.
Seasonal staff wages increase is 742%.
Okay, that line item.
Is that your trail maintenance?
No, that's a seasonal wage increase
That's street
for
maintenance.
seasonal street workers. That wage increase.
742%?
Well,
It's a small
so
number.
I'm in the wrong line of business.
It's $30,000, and let me explain. It is going.
It's going from 4 to 30.
It's to write the budget with the market, and we currently pay seasonals $14 an hour. What this would do is raise the starting wage to $19 to be competitive with the market. Would pay a little over 2 seasonals for 4 months to work.
Sorry,
So that's what that is.
Yeah, so back to my question.
Yeah, trail maintenance is
Hey,
within
tree
the maintenance, just the Parks Maintenance Department division.
Which is
So
where-
they have just your daily trail maintenance that we do. We do about 2 miles a month in trail maintenance. We utilize between urban forestry, park staff, and then we use DOC crews. So between that, we absorb that within the department budget itself.
Okay.
There is no.
If there's any specific project like you have brought up in the past, Councilmember.
I think there's lots of opportunity.
Well, there's some areas where we had to rock and riprap and then cover over because we do have some drainage issues and concerns we have to address.
You had talked to me about the trail behind the police station needing to be widened significantly.
Right.
Is that coming out of utility because of the utility issue?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Why, because there's a big pipe under that?
Can't fit a truck through it.
Pardon me? Somebody asked.
There's a pipe under that trail, right?
Yes, sanitary sewer
Oh,
underneath
you
that
definitely,
line.
yeah.
So underneath that trail, I mean, so we have to have access to the, so Todd can get his equipment in there because the equipment has to go right over the top of the manhole.
Thank you.
Sure. Where'd we leave off?
Councilmember
Go
Holland.
back to the slide we were on. Because I got a general question, guys. Nope, keep going. Next one. That one right there. No, wait a minute. What slide is this? No, go one more for me.
Keep going.
This is the one. So I got a general question. You have no, you've put in no staff increase. So if I look at the organizational change capacity, the accounts don't balance for me. I'm taking streets, which is a major part of what that portion of the department does, and I'm going to increase that by 8 times.
This whole slide is strictly to do with services and supplies at the top.
I understand. I don't know that you can absorb an 800% increase in street and a 400% increase in street maintenance with the staff we currently have. So it puts some doubt in my mind whether or not you can actually execute against this. That's a chunk of change for an organization.
So when you look at that, Kevin Halbert is our sole street person, and what he does is he contracts out. We contract out guardrail, we contract out grind overlays, we contract out quite a bit. So when you look at this slide, as the mayor said, this is a service supply. So you look street light maintenance, we contract that out with Delco PSC. They come in and they're going to put in lights for us. You look at traffic signal painting. We contract that out. We bring in a contractor that's for Swenson and the Parkway.
Dan,
So
my
when
issue
you're
is
asking,
Dale was probably fully engaged when we had the $135,000 worth of stuff going on. And now I'm going to have 10 times that. Dale's going to spend 1/10 of a time on each project that he did prior and still execute accordingly?
managing the contracts, you mean?
Yeah.
Dan, can you maybe jump ahead a few slides and explain there's 2 enhancements? One's an administrative assistant support, the other's a contract manager.
Well, the other point, even on the street tree replacement and sidewalks, that's being done through more contract, right? Yeah.
We need somebody to
Phil's there
administer
for
those.
each one of them.
We have to administer those, but
I just don't want you to work Phil to death, okay?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
What they're referring to is that we have two new positions, enhancements. One is an administrative assistant to help with some of these
Here it
things.
is, right here.
As well as a CIP contract administrator. And both of those will have dedicated 20% of their time each to parks and 20% of their time to streets and then other utilities and so on and so forth.
So here you see the CIP manager, contract administrator, with the breakout of his time, or her time frame. Sorry. And then the position prior to this is Administrator 2, Coordinator. So those two positions will be helping.
Can you back up a slide?
Still got an elephant to swallow, but all right.
150 is for two people?
One person with benefit, includes everything, all in.
Fully loaded.
And that position was a what?
CIP manager, Capital Improvement Program Manager.
And wasn't there, what's the second head count?
Administrative assistant, clerical support.
Administrative 2, Utilities Tech.
Administrative assistants don't make 150, do they?
No,
Back
that
up
one's
one.
100,000 with benefits.
102. 102.
Jody
with
was not
benefits.
laughing at that last comment.
102
Okay.
with benefits.
Okay, I see that one. Okay.
So that's where you get some additional support. Great. Keep it going, guys.
We're going.
How are we doing on time support, guys?
We do.
Are we behind, ahead? What? I didn't pay attention to the schedule.
We may be at a natural break for the utilities, Mayor.
Okay.
You want to take a break now, or?
Well, would the council want to take a 5-minute break?
Sure.
All right. I'm kind of planning that we would try to wrap up the budget like 10 till so we could do an executive session and get everybody out just shortly after 9, unless you guys want to just keep pushing past 9.
Right now.
Notice it till 9 o'clock.
Well, it's approximate, yeah.
Not past 9.
Not past 9. Okay, so I will try to stop a little early, give you these 10 or 15 minutes for executive session.
Mayor?
What?
Regarding that particular issue, I think it might take more than 10 minutes.
All right, so maybe 1:45, which would
Well-
give us another half an hour on this.
15 minutes should be.
We normally reserve 10 or 15 minutes for
All right.
executive sessions.
Let me put it this way, it's better than going on this till 9 and probably taking a half an hour in executive
Yeah.
session. So at the very least, we'll get out by 9:15-ish or so. It'll be up to you guys. So with that, let's take a break until 8:20. Council, City Administrator was proposing that we kind of have a good cutoff point between a general fund and moving on to utilities funds or enterprise funds. So maybe this would be a good time to just wrap that up tonight, and if you'd like, we just go into executive session, which could take half an hour, which would get us out, 10 till or certainly before 9 o'clock. Would you be okay with doing that at this hour? Or do you want to keep plowing on?
How much time do we need Thursday night?
Well, we're going to have 4 hours Thursday night.
We said, we've got to get through the utilities, and then we have to get through some other more business, just general things. So it could take the better part of the 4 hours, depending on how long you want to spend on utilities. Most of that's already been done, if you know, with the utility bond, but we can certainly run through that fairly quickly if council wants to, or we can do more detail. But we think we'll use that. We may even need another session after that, just depending on what we get accomplished this week.
Well, don't forget, we pushed fleets into next Thursday too, so we've got, take a look at that ERR fund.
Right, that's on the agenda.
So would we, on the schedule then for Thursday, are we talking about the capital projects overview, or are we going to push things ahead of your presentation and transmittal letter? I mean, we're going to need to get through these things before you transmit the budget to us, aren't you? I mean, how does that work?
So the transmittal letter, that's just a 5-minute discussion.
Shoot your podium, Robert.
It's a statutory deadline, so we can amend it after the fact. We just have to submit the proposed budget as a transmittal letter. Don't you love these deadlines? I do. Actually, I don't, because I won't sleep the next 2 days.
Deadline, but we can amend it after the fact. All right.
No, it's statutory for.
Ask your lawmaker. Ask your state lawmaker about it.
I understand.
And we can amend it after the fact for the 3 members of the public that actually read it.
I'm sure the state auditor reads it. Probably not.
All right. So, council, any objection to just moving on to executive session and wrapping up the budget at this point?
Okay.
All right. Sorry, I forget, did someone give me the language on the executive session here tonight? Where'd Bob go?
The agenda, Jody?
It's in the packet I gave you.
Sharpen that pencil, Todd.
I'm going to be right here.
Sharpen it really good.
Isn't he the biggest chunk of change in?
All right, so at this time, I'll call an executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, Section 1II regarding a potential litigation. Bob Sturbank, Bob Larson, and Mark Hoffman are asked to remain. Executive session will last approximately 15 minutes, and that there may be action following.
All right.
Everybody else is invited to head home, yeah.